Kevin had just exposed the con man who was trying to sell a fake gold and pearl necklace to Phoebe. He was able to stop him from running out by throwing a box at his leg, knocking him to the ground. Phoebe ordered her guards, "Call the police and have him taken to the police station." Everyone immediately surrounded McKay. Grant pointed an accusatory finger at him and yelled, "You're selling fakes? I can't believe I almost fell for it." However, as he turned around to leave, Kevin had already blocked his path. "What's with you? The thief is over there. Why are you stopping me?" Grant complained. This made everyone turn around. "Why are you in such a hurry to leave? Aren't you going to take your partner along?" Kevin said with a sneer. "I assure you I'm a legitimate businessman," Grant said in a haughty voice as he tried to go around Kevin and head for the door. But Kevin suddenly grabbed Grant's wrist. "Your acting skills aren't that great either," Kevin said to him. "Can't you see that I'm a victim too?" Grant pleaded. He struggled hard but found that Kevin's hand was like a steel clamp, tightly gripping his wrist. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break free. They all heard sirens in the street and looked out the front window. Kevin had just sent an urgent text message to Officer Emmett. The police lieutenant walked directly to Kevin and asked, "Where are the suspects?" "One is here and the other is over there," Kevin pointed at McKay and Grant. "Officer, don't listen to him. I just came in here to shop for antiques. If he tells you anything else, he's a liar," Grant said. The antique dealers from the neighboring shops pulled McKay over to Emmett. One of them said, "Officer, Mr. Grant is telling the truth. We're all witnesses." He paused and continued, "He's framing Mr. Grant to make himself look good and impress President Anderson." Kevin couldn't believe how misguided these men were. How could they have fallen for this nonsense? Officer Emmett looked disappointed. She turned to look at Phoebe, who was standing next to her. "Miss Anderson, do you think this person is involved in the crime?" Phoebe didn't know what to say, so she just shook her head. Emmett sighed a little and turned to look back at Kevin. She informed him, "Since none of the witnesses say that he was involved, I have no choice but to let him go." Kevin couldn't believe that someone with Officer Emmett's experience couldn't see through the deception. He was about to give up and let go of Grant's arm when he noticed that there seemed to be something wrong with the man's face. He reached out and pulled on Grant's skin. Everyone was shocked to see him standing there, holding the man's face in his hand. Well, it was actually a mask, and the nasty face that underneath was pretty frightening. "So it's you!" Emmett exclaimed as she tightly grabbed onto Grant's collar. Kevin looked at her in surprise. "You know him?" Emmett nodded and explained. "Half a year ago, a rich Chicago art collector was swindled out of a painting worth about $250,000. We've been following leads ever since, but couldn't find a trace of suspects." "It was them?" Kevin asked her. "Yes, it's them." Emmett nodded again. "They have a unique approach, using various disguises to trick their victims." A few backup officers entered the store to help, and Emmett ordered them to pull the mask from McKay's face. It was made of very realistic artificial skin, very convincing to say the least. "Kevin, thank you for helping us catch these two criminals. You've made a great contribution," Officer Emmett said happily. Kevin smiled and shrugged his shoulders. Then he glanced at the owners of the antique shops. The ones who had been speaking in Grant's defense were especially embarrassed. They were staring at Kevin in surprise. The masks on Grant and McKay's faces were so realistic that nobody noticed anything unusual. But how did Kevin see through the deception? As the prisoners were being escorted to the squad cars, Officer Emmett suddenly asked Kevin, "I'm very curious. How did you see that they were wearing masks?" "To tell you the truth, it was Grant's fault. When he struggled, the edge of his mask curled up. Pretty careless of him," Kevin said casually. Officer Emmett had some doubts about his explanation. Grant had disguised himself incredibly well. The mask and his entire face were really convincing. But Kevin could actually see the tiny gap in the slightly raised corner at a glance. "When did my eyesight get so good?" Kevin thought to himself. "In any case, I owe you my thanks. When I have the time, I'll treat you to dinner." After Officer Emmett said this, she headed out to her squad car and drove away. The owners of the neighborhood antique shops also left. Phoebe slowly walked up to Kevin and said a very sincere, "Thank you." "No need to thank me. It was my pleasure," Kevin said with a smile. When Phoebe heard him say this, a faint smile appeared on her face. "By the way, I could tell from your discussion of the pearls that you know a lot about the subject. Have you had any formal training in antique appraisal?" Kevin thought for a second and said, "I used to know an old gentleman who taught me a lot about antiques." What Kevin didn't expect was that Phoebe would suddenly become so excited to hear this. She asked him, "Are you still in touch with him? Do you know his name and address?" Phoebe gave Kevin a hopeful look. She wondered how he had been able to see through the deception at a single glance. He obviously knew things that she didn't. Phoebe figured that his teacher must be even more knowledgeable. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I haven't seen him in a very long time. I have no idea where he is," Kevin said apologetically. Phoebe let out a disappointed sigh. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "Kevin, can I ask you for a favor?" "Just name it, Phoebe. As long as it's something I can help with, I'll do my best," Kevin said straightforwardly. "I want to invite you to be the chief antique appraiser for Anderson Fine Jewelry and Antiques," she said. Phoebe seemed to be afraid that Kevin would refuse, so she quickly added, "You don't have to come to work every day, but if I need your help, I'll expect you to come in. I can give you a salary of $150,000 a year for your effort. Would that be okay?" Phoebe was nervous because she didn't know if he'd be interested, but at the moment, Kevin was the most insightful expert she knew. Mr. Landau, who was standing nearby, gasped when he heard this. He had worked for the Andersons for over 10 years, but he barely made a third of that salary. If Kevin was only going to be a part-time consultant, why would his salary be so high? On the other hand, Mr. Landau had witnessed Kevin's profound knowledge and insight, so he couldn't disagree with the decision to hire him. He was envious of Kevin's offer, but felt that he deserved his good fortune. "Let me get this straight. I don't need to come into work every day, and I'll earn $150,000 a year. Why would I say no to that offer?" Kevin agreed right away. He felt that it was getting late, so he said goodbye to Phoebe and headed back to the office, carrying the tiara in his bag. That night, Kevin went home to his new apartment. He sent a message to Lily, showered, and went to bed. The next morning, as soon as Kevin arrived at his office, Miss Wilson came in to give him a report on the company's activities. "Mr. Williams, today is the premiere of Brittany Davis's show, the one that the Jones family took the lead on. Do you want to attend?" she asked him. "I won't be able to attend. If I go, it may affect Brittany's performance. If you can set up the live feed, I'll just watch it here at my desk," Kevin explained. He was well aware that Brittany's deal had been set up by the Jones family. Moreover, Lily was personally responsible for it. If he appeared in front of his wife, his true identity would certainly be exposed. "I understand, sir," Miss Wilson replied. Then she left to make the arrangements for him. A while later, the live feed was set up on his computer, and Kevin watched Brittany slowly walk on the stage. He noticed that you could hear a lot of noise from the audience, which made it hard to appreciate Brittany's performance. Then, when Brittany was halfway through her song, there was a problem with her microphone. The crowd began to boo. As the sound engineers were trying to fix it, Brittany stomped her feet angrily and turned around to go backstage. Kevin slammed his fist on his desk and called Miss Wilson in. "What's going on over there?" he asked her. "I have no idea, sir. I'll go find out right away," Miss Wilson replied. Then she left the room and went to her desk to make a call. Kevin looked in astonishment at the dent that he just made in his desk with his fist. He stared at the deep indentation and wondered, how did I get so damn strong? Just then, Miss Wilson hung up her phone. Kevin grabbed a few documents and used them to cover his desk so that she wouldn't see what he'd done. "Sir, I have an update on the show. There are 4 engineers in charge of Brittany's sound equipment backstage. Unfortunately, they've all made a mess of the production," Miss Wilson explained. When Kevin heard this, he understood immediately and said, "Please call them to my office." "Right away, sir." Miss Wilson also had some suspicions, so she was glad that Kevin had made this request. After she left, Kevin immediately picked up his phone and called Mitchell Cook. "Hi, Mitch. I'm in my office at the Williams building. I need some help with a few things. You think you can come downtown?" A little over a half an hour later, the 4 staff members who had screwed up Brittany's show entered the CEO's office and saw Mitchell Cook sitting in Kevin's office chair smoking a cigar. There were several men in black suits and sunglasses on either side of him. Kevin could have easily gotten the 4 of them to talk, but he didn't want to expose his identity.
So, I understand you're all sound engineers. Were you just working backstage at Brittany's show?
Well, what I'd like to understand is what the hell happened to our star performer's microphone? Cook asked sternly as he blew a smoke ring toward the ceiling. Kevin, who was standing with Cook's bodyguard, shook his head when he saw the 4 of them.
Cat's got your tongue? Do you know who I am? He asked with a sneer. I'm Mitchell Cook. If you dare lie to me, I guarantee there will be consequences.
When they heard his name, the 4 unlucky sound engineers were quaking in their boots. Everyone knew about Cook's reputation throughout Chicago. After about a minute of this staring contest, one of them couldn't take the pressure and he stammered, "As long as you don't hurt me, I'll tell you whatever you want to know." The other 3 men looked at each other and started to cooperate too. A few minutes later, Cook ended the impromptu meeting and waved them out of the room. Then Cook stood up and smiled, saying,
"Kevin, everything is clear to me now."
"Why, that's amazing, Mr. Cook. I didn't realize you were so well known around here," Kevin teased.
No need to thank me, Kevin. If it wasn't for your help, I wouldn't be so successful right now.
After saying this, Cook said with a hint of curiosity in his voice,
"Kevin, there's one thing I don't understand. Now that you're the head of Williams Media, why are you still staying in the Jones family?"
"I have my reasons, Mitch. Let's drop the subject for now," Kevin answered. After a few more minutes of small talk, Kevin asked Miss Wilson to walk Cook back to the elevator. Then he let her know that if Williams Media needed any hotels in the future, they should put the Whistler Hotel at the top of the list. After Cook left, Kevin's phone rang. Dorothy's voice blared in Kevin's earpiece.
"You're a real piece of work. You haven't been home in days. Do you have any idea what just happened? Hurry up and meet us at the Jones mansion."
Actually, Dorothy didn't want to see Kevin. It was Grandma Jones who had ordered everyone in the Jones family to come right away. She was furious. "All right, I'll be right there," Kevin responded. Then he hung up the phone and rushed over to the Jones mansion. Of course, he knew what this call was about. While waiting at a stoplight, Kevin called Brittany. At that very moment, Brittany was in her room crying about the disaster at her show. There were tears flowing down her face, and she was heartbroken. When she saw that Kevin was calling, Brittany answered very politely and nervously,
"Mr. Williams, I'm sorry. I just don't know how this happened."
The botched show had ruined her image, erasing all of her previous success, and the company suffered an enormous loss. So Brittany assumed that Kevin was calling to chew her out. "No need to apologize. I've already sent someone to investigate this matter. This has nothing to do with you. It looks like it's an internal problem in the Jones family," Kevin said with a sigh.
"Oh, Mr. Williams, is this true?" Brittany asked in surprise.
"Don't ask any more questions right now. Miss Wilson will send you an email later, and I'll need you to do exactly as I say," Kevin instructed her. When Kevin hung up the phone, he'd just arrived at the Jones mansion. As he walked in the room, Kevin saw that the entire Jones family was standing in the main reception room. Grandma Jones, who was sitting on a chair, had a gloomy expression on her face. Since the Jones family was in charge of the project, they assumed that Williams Media would blame them for a disastrous show. When they saw Kevin walk in, they all looked displeased. They didn't know why she'd asked him to come to their meeting. What use could he be? Had he just come to poke fun at them? Suddenly, Jason stood up and pointed at Lily. He sneered and said, "Lily, it wasn't easy for our family to set up the deal with Williams Media. You screwed everything up, so now it's up to you to tell Grandma how to fix it." "I'm sorry, Grandma," Lily said sadly. Without waiting for Grandma Jones to reply, Jason interrupted and said, "What's the use of being sorry? Are you just looking for Grandma's pity? Whether you're sorry or not, Williams Media is going to blame us for your blunder." Then Jason turned his head to look at Grandma Jones and continued, "Grandma, I think Lily did a terrible job. In order to keep something like this from happening again, I suggest you pull her out of all her duties in the company. That way she won't be able to interfere in our business anymore. We can't let Williams Media hold us responsible for her incompetence." One of the younger members of the family said, "That's right, Grandma. What Jason said makes sense." Another one commented,
"Lily really blew it. I think this would be a good way to punish her for her failure."
Everyone around him nodded in approval. Grandma Jones looked around the room and then looked at Lily. She coldly said,
"Then it's agreed. From this moment on, you will have no say in the company's affairs."
When Lily heard this, her face instantly turned pale. She wanted to explain but just couldn't find the words. Kevin had been watching all of this from the sidelines. What could he do to help without revealing his true identity to Lily? Just as Grandma Jones finished speaking, Kevin stepped forward and declared loudly, "I disagree." Everyone in the room burst into laughter.
"Did I hear that right? He actually disagreed?" they were asking each other.
One of the older members of the Jones family said,
"Just because you know the owner of the Whistler Hotel and the president of West Chicago International, don't let it go to your head."
One of Lily's aunts agreed.
"That's right. Since when do you have a voice in our private business?"
They all looked at Kevin like he was a bonehead.
"What did you just say?"
Grandma Jones asked sternly. "I said I object," Kevin sneered and added. "As for the problems with Brittany's show, you should investigate what really happened before listening to Jason's nonsense and putting all of the blame on my wife."
"So, do you believe we're being unfair to Lily?"
Grandma Jones asked. "After you look into it, you'll find out what a huge mistake you've made," Kevin replied calmly. Just as Grandma Jones was about to say something, Jason interrupted.
"Kevin, you really have some nerve. Take a look around. None of us want to hear what you have to say,"
Jason said disdainfully. "I just want Grandma to investigate this matter further. Why would that bother you?" Kevin looked Jason in the eyes and asked him, "Does this have something to do with you?" A strange look flashed across Jason's eyes and he sneered.
"What right do you have to question my involvement?"
"Then how can you be so sure that this must be my wife's responsibility?" Kevin noticed something in Jason's reaction and he asked him seriously, "Could it be that this whole mess really is your fault?" Jason looked at Kevin awkwardly. Just as he was about to attack Kevin physically, he remembered what had happened at Grandma Jones's birthday party and he lost his nerve. Kevin took advantage of Jason's hesitation and said, "I don't care who caused all the trouble behind the scenes at Brittany's show. All I know is my wife is innocent." Kevin's intent was obvious and they all knew what he meant. However, nobody was willing to agree without some solid evidence.
"I think you're deliberately looking to start trouble. Don't talk nonsense,"
Jason shot back as he clenched his fists.
"Remember, you're not a true member of the Jones family and you have no say here."
"I didn't say you did it, Jason. Why are you getting so worked up?" Kevin replied as he looked deep into his eyes. Suddenly, Grandma Jones slapped the table hard. She had been very unhappy to see Kevin show up for the meeting, but because of his close ties to Cook and President Wright, she didn't say anything. But he was causing a lot of trouble for her favorite grandson in front of the entire family. She couldn't take any more of it.
"Kevin, if you plan to say another word about this, you can get the hell out of here right now,"
Grandma Jones said callously. Seeing Grandma getting so angry, most of the Joneses were curious to see how this would play out. Lily, who looked very worried, walked over to Kevin and tugged on his sleeve. "Grandma's getting upset. Please stop, Kevin. This isn't getting us anywhere." Dorothy walked up to them and said,
"Kevin, you're only causing trouble. What gives you the right to open your big mouth here?"
First, Kevin looked at Dorothy, who was obviously irate. Then he looked at the rest of the Jones family surrounding him. Finally, his gaze stopped on Lily. Taking a deep breath, Kevin patted Lily's shoulder and calmly stepped aside.
"Okay, everyone, get back to work," Grandma Jones ordered. Then she said, "Jason, go and discuss this with Williams Media. Try to minimize the impact on our company."
"Okay, Grandma,"
Jason replied as he gave Lily a scornful look. Just as the Joneses were about to leave, they heard a charming voice from the mansion's foyer. May I ask if Grandma Jones is here? Everyone looked over and saw a beautiful woman slowly walking into the room. Grandma Jones recognized Brittany at a glance and her face fell. She subconsciously believed that Brittany was there to accuse them. But she forced a smile and asked, "Why, Brittany, what brings you here today? You should have let us know you were coming, so we could have prepared a proper welcome for you." "Why, thank you, Grandma Jones," Brittany replied with a polite nod. "Please have a seat," Grandma Jones offered with a smile. "I'm sorry, but I prefer to remain standing," Brittany said graciously. She had already seen Kevin standing in the crowd and felt a little uneasy about the situation. Grandma Jones spoke to her in a serene voice. "Miss Davis, please don't be angry. The problems at the show were all our fault, and it will cost us dearly. Rest assured that I've already taught Lily a lesson. She's been pulled from all our company projects." When Brittany heard this, she turned to look at Lily. Lily could barely make eye contact. Even though she knew she was innocent, she was starting to believe that everything was her fault. As everyone watched, Brittany slowly walked over to her. "Please don't blame yourself, Lily. I've already looked into this, and it isn't your fault at all." Everyone was stunned to hear this. Some of them immediately remembered what Kevin had said. They couldn't help but look over at Jason. "Brittany, are you sure?" Lily asked in disbelief. "Yes, Lily, it's the truth," Brittany reassured her. Grandma Jones was also a little stunned and asked her, "Miss Davis, can you be more specific about what happened?" Brittany slowly turned around and looked directly at Jason, who was standing off to the side. When Jason met Brittany's gaze, he got a strange feeling in the pit of his stomach. He wondered, could she have found out that I'm responsible for all of this? Just as Jason was trying to figure out what to do, Brittany turned and shouted towards the door. "You guys can come in now. Tell Grandma Jones everything that happened. We have to clear Lily's name." They all saw the 4 Williams Media sound engineers walk in slowly, looking incredibly guilty. Jason was frantic, but he forced himself to look calm. "Why haven't you told Grandma Jones about any of this?" Brittany snapped. One of the Williams employees pointed right at Jason and shouted, "It's him! It was Jason Jones who ordered us to do it." The second one added, "That's right. He gave us $75,000 each to sabotage Brittany's microphone." The third employee finally spoke up and said, "Mr. Jones also said that he would give us each another $75,000 after it was done." The last one was too afraid to speak, but instead just stared at Jason and nodded in agreement. The entire Jones family was now glaring at Jason. Because Brittany was there, he tried not to curse. "Stop slandering me, you bastards! I've never seen any of you guys before," Jason screamed hysterically. "Don't you know who I am? Do you know what the consequences will be for trying to frame me like this?" Grandma Jones turned to look at Brittany and asked her gently, "Are you sure what they've said is true? This is a very serious matter, and I can't let my grandson be wrongly accused." Kevin shook his head in disbelief. He really didn't understand what Grandma Jones was thinking. How come she refused to believe Brittany and these 4 men? "We're telling the truth," the fourth employee blurted out. "I still have a record of the bank transfer. I haven't moved a single cent of the money he gave me." As he spoke, one of his partners took out his phone and shouted, "I've got proof too." "Don't try to put all the blame on us," said another one as he also pulled out his phone. They knew what kind of man Jason was. However, they decided they'd rather face Jason's wrath than have to explain themselves to Mitchell Cook. Jason was furious. He stared at them as they stood there holding out their phones. "Jason, are you really responsible for all this?" Grandma Jones looked very upset. Jason didn't know what to say to her. Suddenly, Kevin nudged Lily's shoulder and asked her mischievously, "How are you doing? You feel any better now?" "Shut up," Lily scowled, but she was definitely relieved. After a while, Grandma Jones took a deep breath and looked at Brittany awkwardly. "You'll have to forgive Jason. He's young and foolish. If you want to blame someone, blame me for not teaching him better." Even though the evidence was right in front of her eyes, Grandma Jones was still defending Jason out of love for her grandson. "I understand, Grandma Jones. It's all right," she replied. "I just came here to make sure that Lily wouldn't be wrongly accused." But Brittany still had a sad look in her eyes. Grandma Jones seemed to understand what she meant. Then she turned to look at her favorite grandson.
"I'm disappointed in you, Jason. I've obviously been too easy on you. How could you do such a terrible thing? As of right now, I forbid you to be involved in our family business, and I also forbid you to leave the property for 1 year. If you do, there will be serious consequences."
On the outside, Jason was incredibly arrogant, but he could never argue with Grandma. He bit his tongue and answered, "Yes, Grandma." Grandma Jones turned to look at Brittany again.
"Are you satisfied now?"
Brittany took a moment to answer. After she saw Kevin lightly nod his head, she said, "It looks like you have the situation under control." But then she got a serious look on her face and added, "That's all in the past now, but I do have a request."
"Please tell me what you have on your mind,"
Grandma Jones said without thinking. As far as Grandma was concerned, as long as Brittany didn't pursue this matter any further, the family wouldn't suffer, and neither would Jason. Brittany's eyes swept across the room, and she looked at them one by one before she slowly said, "In order to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, Lily will be my contact for any further projects. I don't want to work with anyone else."
"What do you mean by this?"
Grandma Jones asked in confusion. "Because Lily is the only one that I trust." Brittany didn't even look at Grandma Jones. "Do you agree?"
"You have my word,"
Grandma replied. Even if she didn't like the idea, all she could do at this point was smile and agree. Everybody in the room was jealous of Lily, and even though Brittany's image had taken a hit, she still had the full support of Williams Media and was sure to make a comeback. As long as they were behind her, they would definitely make Brittany famous again, and Lily would have lots of opportunities to earn money on future projects. Just when everyone thought that Brittany had finished, she walked up to Kevin and asked him, "Mr. Williams, what do you think of my solution?" "Very good," Kevin said awkwardly. He didn't expect Brittany to do this. His response made Brittany smile. Then she announced to everyone, "As long as Mr. Williams is satisfied, I guess I can head home." She turned around and slowly walked out of the Jones mansion to her car. Everybody started to whisper to each other, "What did I just see? Did Brittany actually ask Kevin for his approval?" Grandma Jones almost fell off of her chair. She looked at Kevin in disbelief. "That's funny. Maybe you should get someone to look into this further," Kevin said mockingly. Lily pulled on Kevin's arms and pleaded with him. "Please stop." She didn't want to risk upsetting her family further, especially Grandma Jones. But Kevin had other things on his mind. After bringing in the sound engineers who had sabotaged her premiere, Brittany made Grandma Jones promise that only Lily would work with her from now on. And Grandma gave Jason what she thought was a suitable punishment: house arrest. Before he left, Kevin told the Jones family, "Maybe you should get someone to look into this further." The sarcasm in his voice wasn't lost on them, and it showed on their faces. With Grandma Jones giving him a very dirty look, Kevin slowly walked out of the mansion. Lily trotted out of the front door right behind him and said, "Kevin, wait a second." "What's the matter, my love?" Kevin asked with a smile. Lily blushed a little when Kevin called her that. She gathered herself and asked, "Kevin, tell me honestly, did you already know the truth before you came here? And how do you know Brittany? Why did she call you Mr. Williams?" After hearing Lily's last question, Kevin raised an eyebrow. With a mischievous smile, he replied, "Don't tell me you're jealous." "No, I'm not. Please tell me the truth." Lily didn't know why, but she couldn't look directly into Kevin's eyes. Kevin smiled, shook his head, and said gently, "That's enough. I won't tease you anymore. To tell you the truth, Brittany and I went to school together." "If you were classmates, then why did she call you Mr. Williams? And why did she come over and ask if you were okay with her decision?" Lily searched Kevin's eyes, hoping to see the truth. "I have no idea. Maybe it's because I'm so charming," Kevin answered with a shrug. However, before Lily could press the issue any further, Kevin's phone suddenly rang. Without looking at the caller ID, Kevin said right away, "It must be my boss looking for me. I have to head to work. Take care of yourself." Kevin didn't give Lily a chance to ask any more questions. He just turned around and left. Kevin walked pretty far from the Jones mansion before he took out his phone again. He saw that it was Phoebe calling. Slightly confused, Kevin dialed her number. "Hello, Miss Anderson. Sorry about the delay getting back to you. Is there anything I can help with?" "Kevin, I really need your help. Do you have the time?" Phoebe sounded anxious. "I think I can pull myself away from work. Where are you?" Kevin asked straightforwardly. "I'm at the store. I'll be waiting for you at the door when you get here," Phoebe replied. She wanted to make sure Kevin got a better welcome than last time. After hanging up, Kevin waved down a taxi and got to Anderson Antiques in half an hour. As he paid the fare, he felt something in the pit of his stomach. What was it? He wondered. As soon as Phoebe saw Kevin, she immediately grabbed him by the arm and ushered him through the front door. As they walked toward the middle of the room, they could hear at least 10 of the local antique shop owners arguing loudly.
"This is definitely fake."
Then another one said,
"I'd bet everything I own. This painting is definitely authentic."
Then a third one responded, "You don't know what you're talking about. Just look at the frame. There's no way this is genuine." Kevin squeezed through the crowd and saw a man watching all of this with a distraught look on his face. It was Phoebe's father, Truman Anderson. He was examining a landscape painting very attentively. "Uncle Truman, you've been looking at that painting for so long now. What's your opinion?" When Kevin heard the pleasant voice, he looked around and saw a familiar face, Matilda Jones. "Kevin, what are you doing here?" Matilda asked curiously. Before Kevin could say anything, Phoebe turned to Truman and asked, "Dad, what do you think? Do you want me to ask another appraiser to take a look?" Truman knew more about art history than almost anyone in Chicago. If even he couldn't identify it, how could anyone else do better? Just then, the man who was trying to sell them the painting asked nervously,
"Mr. Anderson, can't you see that this is an authentic landscape? We need a decision right away."
"Please, don't be impatient," Truman replied. "This certainly looks like a 17th century Dutch landscape. However, I'm not familiar with the artist, so it's difficult to come to a conclusion. The material looks authentic, and I can even see the proper copper and iron pigments," he continued, and then paused. "My instincts tells me that this is from the Dutch Golden Age, but I don't recognize the artist. I just can't say it with certainty. Something's not right."
"So you're saying that my painting's a forgery?" the man said angrily.
"I think it might be," Truman replied. He just couldn't give a definite appraisal. The other experts in the room mumbled in agreement.
"Mr. Anderson must know what he's talking about."
While they were all discussing the painting, Kevin slowly walked up and asked, "May I take a look?" One of them spoke up and rudely asked Kevin, "What are you doing? Do you think you know more than one of Chicago's leading experts? You're just going to make a fool of yourself." Matilda heard all these men scoffing at Kevin and looked over to see his reaction. She didn't know him well, but what she did know was that at Grandma Jones's birthday party, he had been able to appraise an 18th century brooch at a glance. He had definitely made an impression on her. But this was different. Even Mr. Anderson thought that the painting was probably a fake. If Kevin made a fool of himself, she might open herself up to ridicule too, especially by her family. Truman looked at Kevin in surprise and then asked, "Aren't you Dorothy Jones's son-in-law?" Phoebe interrupted awkwardly. "Dad, this is the antique appraiser that I brought in as a consultant." When the onlookers heard this, they all started laughing.
"Miss Anderson actually hired this moron as a consultant?"
One of them jeered. Truman looked at his daughter and let out a slow sigh. He'd never seen Kevin before, but he had heard a lot of rumors about him. It was the usual gossip that Jason had been spreading around amongst the members of the Jones family. According to them, Kevin was useless, and they all hoped that he and Lily would get a divorce as soon as possible. But he trusted his daughter. After all, she had been doing a fantastic job with the store. If she had thought that he had something to contribute, Truman was willing to listen. "Please be careful. If it turns out to be a forgery, we don't want to owe this man anything for damages," Truman said. "Don't worry, sir," Kevin replied as he started to study the painting. The atmosphere in the room changed. Everyone watched patiently to see if Kevin would make a fool of himself. Some of them were wondering if Phoebe was still too young to be in such a prominent position in the company. Phoebe started to get nervous. Although she was very confident in Kevin, she wondered if he was making a mistake. After all, her father had just given his own opinion. After only half a minute, Kevin's eyes flashed and he stood up straight with an astonished look on his face. The mumbling and comments from the onlookers started up again. They were all wondering how he could have come to a decision so quickly. But Kevin didn't pay attention to them. He turned around and looked at Phoebe and asked, "How much does he want for it?" Before she had a chance to reply, the man said hurriedly, "200,000. "That sounds about right." Kevin nodded slightly. The rudest of the onlookers said loudly, "Who does he think he is? It's not worth $50. Mr. Anderson already said it was a fake." Matilda was disappointed to see this. Truman let out another sigh and looked at his daughter glumly. "So this is your expert?" If there hadn't been so many people around, he would have scolded his daughter. She was actually paying this guy $150,000 a year? Sure, they could afford it, but he still didn't like to waste money. When Phoebe heard this, she felt awful. How could Kevin have come to a decision so quickly? Did he really know anything? She was starting to have her doubts. Truman looked directly at Kevin and asked him bluntly, "Can you tell me why this thing is worth $200,000? Kevin knew that the painting was worth 10 times that amount, but he hesitated to say it out loud. Instead, he asked Truman, "Have you ever heard of someone named Vermeer?" Truman was stunned by this question. He answered with a hint of indignation in his voice. "Of course I have. One of the finest Dutch masters. But he only painted 2 landscapes in his lifetime. What you're suggesting is impossible." "How could this possibly be a Vermeer?" Truman asked him. The antique dealers surrounding them all had very puzzled expressions, not knowing what the two of them were talking about. Kevin explained, "Look closely at the style, the artist's use of light and shadow. There's a distinctive depth to this piece, and the pigments match Vermeer's preferences too. You can't help but feel some emotion as you look at this landscape." "But he hardly ever painted landscapes," Truman responded excitedly. Kevin interrupted him and appealed to his experience. "Mr. Anderson, take another look, and I'm sure you'll agree. This is a lost Vermeer landscape. I'm certain of it." Truman looked at Kevin in surprise. If this young man was right, this was an extraordinary discovery. After hesitating for a moment, he went back to the painting and took another look. This time, he pulled a magnifying glass out of his suit pocket. Less than a minute later, Truman practically jumped up and down. He shouted, "Mr. Landau, please arrange for this gentleman's payment." The antique dealers who had been watching this spectacle with great interest couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. But seeing Mr. Anderson's excited reaction, they felt very awkward that they had been so rude to Kevin. Matilda looked at Kevin in disbelief. She thought to herself, how could he have identified this painting so easily? Phoebe wasn't quite sure what to think. She asked her father, "Dad, are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. Hurry up before the seller changes his mind," he whispered hurriedly in her ear. The man seemed to be anxious to complete the sale and leave.
"Fine, then go ahead and pay me. I still have other things to do today, and I've already wasted a lot of time here."
Kevin laughed to himself. The man had no idea what he was giving up for only $200,000. He obviously knew nothing about art, just some guy making a quick buck. So how did someone like that get hold of such a valuable piece of art? Kevin really wanted to find out. Truman Anderson, Phoebe's father, was ecstatic. Kevin had correctly identified a lost Vermeer landscape, and the store was sure to see an enormous profit from the deal. Kevin was pleased to have helped, but then he suddenly noticed a few traces of dirt on the painting. Then he recalled that when he bent down to look at the painting, there was a slight moldy scent. Could this painting have been buried somewhere? Kevin thought to himself. Truman was so happy about this find that he hugged Phoebe and said, "Please make sure this gentleman is paid immediately." Then he turned and walked up the stairs to the second floor. While this was going on, most of the local antique shop owners who had watched the whole scene took out their phones and started looking up the Dutch masters on the internet. When they saw how much the painting was actually worth, they were filled with envy. The seller happily accepted the payment and walked out of the store whistling. After a little while, Truman returned to the showroom. He walked up to Kevin and put a card into his hand. "Kevin, I didn't expect you to be so gifted and discerning. I'm really grateful to you. Please accept this token of my appreciation." "That's very kind of you, Mr. Anderson, but after all, I am one of your employees," Kevin replied with a smile. Of course, he gladly accepted Truman's gift. This bonus was probably nothing compared to the profit that the store could make on the painting. "Phoebe was right about you," Truman said sincerely. "You may be young, but you're an excellent appraiser. Let's have a drink later. My treat." Truman was obviously excited about his newest acquisition. Seeing Kevin's potential, he thought it would be nice to have a talk with him. "Thank you for the kind offer. Unfortunately, I have some things to take care of today. I'll have to take a rain check. We'll get together soon, and it can be my treat," Kevin said while giving him a warm handshake. "All right then, I won't keep you," Truman replied gratefully. "Let's get together soon." Then Kevin headed out the door. Phoebe, Matilda, and the others were surprised to see Kevin leave in such a hurry. Why would he pass up this opportunity to make friends with the company's owner? Kevin wasn't worried about that right now. As soon as he stepped out of the door, he spotted the man who had just sold the painting. "There's something wrong with this guy. I'm sure he dug that priceless painting up somewhere," Kevin thought to himself. Then he tailed him to see where he could be heading. After 2 hours of this, he saw the man go below street level to Wacker Drive, the road that runs under part of downtown Chicago. It's mainly for through traffic and deliveries to keep congestion off the surface streets. Otherwise, things would be an even bigger mess at rush hour. There wasn't much room to walk, but Kevin watched the guy go up to a few men near a loading dock. This was in a part of the underground street that was off the beaten path. Not many prying eyes, except for his. He could hear one of them talk. "Greg, what took you so long? Did you sell that thing?" "I wasted a lot of time in that shop," he said as he pulled out his bank card. "I sold the painting for $200,000, easy money." The one who seemed to be in charge asked him, "Was it worth that much?" "I guess so," Greg answered. "Not bad for a day's work, eh, Johnny?" The other man asked, "Should we head down to the south side again tonight and see what else we can dig up?" Greg was interested in trying again. "Yeah, Max, good idea. Last night we only dug out one painting and got $200,000 for it. Maybe we can find some more good stuff." Kevin, who was hiding in the shadows, heard everything they were saying. He couldn't believe it. Could they be grave robbers? Did anyone still do that? Just then, the head grave robber suddenly looked over to where he was hiding. "Who's over there? Why don't you come a little closer?" Could they have seen me? Kevin wondered. Just as he was about to escape, he heard a woman's voice. "You guys are really bold. Robbing tombs? Aren't you superstitious?" The woman walked out from behind a container less than 10 yards away from Kevin, on the other side of the loading dock. Kevin was stunned to see Officer Emmett. How come he kept running into her in all these different places? "So, who's our visitor? You know you're interrupting a private meeting," Johnny said in a threatening tone. Then he turned to his buddies and said, "She's a beauty, isn't she?"
"Yeah, I like what I see," Greg added. "Why don't you come over here and have a seat?"
Hearing their boorish comments, Officer Emmett started to get a little ticked off. Actually, she'd been aware of this group of thieves for a long time. Early this morning, she caught a break when she spotted them near one of the older cemeteries on the south side. It was pretty much abandoned, so it was surprising to see traffic there, especially so early in the day. She had figured they were up to something, so instead of heading to the station, she followed them here. It had turned out to be a long stakeout while she waited for Greg to come back, but she wanted more proof of how they were fencing their loot. Just as Officer Emmett had suspected, they'd robbed one of the mausoleums that were hidden back in the woods away from the Holy Redemption Cemetery's main entrance. Rumor had it that bootleggers had hidden a lot of their valuables in the cemeteries back in the 1920s. Maybe they had stumbled onto something. She wanted to call for backup, but the cell signal was really crappy down there under the street, especially in her hiding place behind a shipping container. Officer Emmett advised them, You're under arrest. I've recorded your conversation and thanks for having it out here in public, where I wouldn't need a warrant. If you surrender quietly, I might ask the court to go easy on you." Johnny answered in a creepy tone. "I'll tell you what. Why don't you come with us? It can get pretty lonely down at the cemetery." Max added, "Good idea. I never seen such a pretty cop." In spite of her training in conflict resolution, Officer Emmett was getting irritated. "If you guys keep this up, I'll have to use force." She pulled her badge out of her pocket and informed them, "I'm Lieutenant Kelly Emmett of the Chicago Police Department. You're all under arrest." "I don't care who you are. We don't want you here," Johnny laughed. Then a few more men came out of the shadows and joined them. They started walking towards her. "I order you to stop." Emmett knew she was in trouble and she was kicking herself for not calling for backup. "Don't worry, I won't hurt you." Johnny, the group's leader, had a sadistic smile on his face. "But these guys might." She ordered them again. "Stop right there. Don't move." Emmett instinctively reached for her hip, but she wasn't in uniform, so her service weapon was locked up safely at the station. "Great. Now what am I going to do?" she anxiously thought to herself. By then, the men had surrounded her. There were 6 of them. Just as Kevin was about to show himself, he saw Officer Emmett knock one of them to the ground with a beautiful sidekick. She moved like lightning. Kevin was impressed with her fighting skills. In less than a minute, 4 or 5 of them were on the ground, either unconscious or writhing in pain. "Pretty good," Johnny said in surprise. She spoke to the 2 robbers who were still standing. "Put your hands on your heads and kneel on the ground." Greg, the one who'd sold the painting to the Andersons, had been lying on the pavement. Emmett thought she had knocked him out, but she was wrong. The man jumped up, pulled out a switchblade, and held it to her throat. "Not today, officer. It looks like maybe we're going to be arresting you instead," Johnny said as he motioned for the others to tie her up with their belts. Officer Emmett began to worry that they were interested in more than robbing graves. Just then, they were all surprised to hear a man's voice from the shadows. "You guys really are scum. Grave robbery is one thing, but what were you thinking of doing to this nice lieutenant, one of Chicago's finest?" They all looked over and saw Kevin deliberately walking out from behind a box truck while he brushed the dust off his clothes. "Kevin?" Officer Emmett exclaimed. "Hurry up and call the police." Kevin heard her but kept moving forward. He didn't have any intention of leaving. "Damn it, Greg, you let someone follow you?" Johnny said in an annoyed tone of voice.
"Boss, don't worry. It's just the appraiser from the antique store."
"An appraiser?" Johnny scoffed. They were all stunned, especially Officer Emmett. "Kevin, run. Just call the police and we'll be fine," she shouted as she struggled against her restraints. "Shut up," Johnny said as he grabbed her mouth and poured in a bottle of pills. "After we deal with him, we'll get back to you," he snarled. Emmett coughed and asked him frantically, "What did you just do?" "Don't be such a killjoy," he answered. "You're going to take a nice nap." Officer Emmett struggled even more intensely when she heard this. "What the hell is wrong with this guy?" Kevin wondered. Then Greg shouted at Kevin,
"You followed me? I sold the painting and you guys bought it. Just business. What do you want now?"
"Don't get excited," Kevin said calmly. "Shouldn't you be thanking me?"
"Why should I be thanking you?"
he shouted. Kevin shook his head and replied, "If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have gotten a penny for your forgery."
"You saying it was a fake?"
the man asked in shock. Kevin saw the other thugs starting to move towards him. He ripped through them in seconds, tossing the large men left and right.
"Who the hell are you?"
the last man standing asked in horror. Kevin couldn't resist. Gritting his teeth, he snarled, "Who am I? I'm an antiques appraiser." After he said this, the man fainted. Officer Emmett looked like she was in shock. Kevin knelt down next to her and started to remove her restraints. "Are you all right? Do you think you can stand up?" She didn't answer right away. She just shook her head in disbelief. Kevin took the belts and walked over to the unconscious men. He began to search their bodies as he tied them up. Looking through the pockets of the head gangster, Johnny, He found a pill bottle. "What the heck is this?" Kevin wondered. "It could be worse," Officer Emmett said slowly. "When he poured the pills in my mouth, he was so distracted by you that I managed to spit most of them out." She nodded over to the gross pile on the pavement. Kevin handed her the bottle so she could take a look at the label. Then she added, "Yup, looks like they were tranquilizers. I may have swallowed a couple, but it would still be nice to get an ambulance down here right away. And a couple of squad cars." "Can you get a signal down here?" she asked him. Kevin nodded, and then he took out his phone to call for help. "The ambulance will be here soon," Kevin said as he slowly put away his phone. Officer Emmett looked at the 6 men lying on the asphalt tied up with their own belts. Then she stared at Kevin and hesitated for a few seconds before saying, "Why are you here?" Kevin pointed to one of the men lying on the ground and explained, "This guy sold a 17th century Dutch landscape to Anderson Antiques. I had my suspicions, so I followed him here." Officer Emmett believed him and didn't ask any more questions. After an awkward silence, Kevin asked her, "I keep running into you, but I still don't know your name." "Most people just call me Officer Emmett," she replied quietly. Then she added, "Kelly Emmett." Kevin was surprised at this softer side that she was showing. Then Officer Emmett looked at Kevin with a serious expression and said, "Tell me honestly, who are you really?" Kevin didn't answer right away. He wasn't exactly sure what she meant. After thinking for a while, Officer Emmett rephrased her question. "What I mean is, what school of martial arts are you from?" Kevin was speechless. It sounded like she was talking about something from the movies. "I'm sorry, I don't understand your question," he answered candidly. "I know what I saw," Officer Emmett said seriously. "When you defeated these men, your moves looked spontaneous. But I saw something deeper in your movements. I've studied martial arts for years, and I studied Eastern philosophy in college. You were keeping something from me." Kevin really didn't know how to respond. "Officer Emmett, you stream a lot of kung fu movies in your off time, don't you?" "Do you still want to play dumb?" she said sternly. "Didn't you take an oath not to let outsiders see you using your techniques?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," he assured her. "I used to practice some Taekwondo when I was a kid. Everything I just did was entirely subconscious." Officer Emmett wasn't buying his explanation. "So, you really think I'm mistaken?" she muttered to herself. She was so convinced that Kevin started to get curious. "Officer Emmett, what did you mean by what you said earlier?" Kevin asked. "Of course I'm talking about developing your inner power. Don't tell me you really don't know about this." Officer Emmett stared at Kevin while they waited for help to arrive. She continued explaining to Kevin, "I've studied a few different martial arts. You saw me use them a little while ago. What's even more interesting to me is the study and development of life energy. A lot of people spend years working on this. You seem to be tapping into it without even trying. But you really should be careful. Without guidance, this can be very dangerous. It's even more important to avoid getting the attention of the people who want to keep all this a secret." "This sounds like a comic book or something." "Are you kidding me?" Kevin asked in disbelief. "Trust me, I'm deadly serious," Officer Emmett replied gravely. "So are you one of these people?" Kevin asked with a faint smile. "The ones who are into all this stuff?" Officer Emmett didn't answer Kevin's question right away. Her eyes were half closed, but she managed to talk some. "There's a lot going on that the average person doesn't know about. And there are some very powerful people who have decided to put their energy into developing businesses, believe it or not. They've become wealthy entrepreneurs, and some of them have very powerful families." Her voice took on a very solemn tone, and she took a deep breath. Even with all her training, the few pills that she'd taken were starting to make her sleepy. They heard sirens approaching. Help was just a few blocks away now. Kevin counted 5 or 6 police cars heading towards them. "Looks like the cavalry is here," Kevin said with a smile. "Time for me to go." "Wait," Officer Emmett said as she struggled to stand up, but she was feeling too sleepy. "You're safe, and the grave robbery case has been solved. You know how to reach me if you need a statement." "Do I really need to stay?" Kevin asked. "I'm not asking you to make a statement. I'm asking you to take me home," Officer Emmett said slowly. She wasn't feeling much like talking anymore.
Why me? Help just arrived. Don't you want to go with them? Kevin asked in confusion. Don't worry about it. Can you please do this for me? She asked quietly. She didn't want to admit to Kevin that she was embarrassed for letting the gang of robbers get the best of her. She'd never be able to live it down, and it could undermine her authority at the precinct. I guess I could take you home. Do you think you can walk? Kevin asked her. Do you think you could carry me? Emmett asked him. Her voice was barely audible. Kevin nodded and waited for the officers to arrive. Officer Emmett mustered enough strength to give them their orders so they could take the men to the station for processing. Kevin supported her as they walked slowly to her car, which was parked on the street above this underground loading dock. She wasn't very heavy, so nobody suspected just how much Kevin was actually helping her. Kevin managed to get Officer Emmett home safely. He eased her into a recliner in her living room, then he sat down on the sofa and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He looked around and wondered out loud, what's the average salary in the police department these days? He knew that a house in this neighborhood cost at least $500,000. My mom bought it for me, Officer Emmett said sleepily. She paused for a moment and then asked him, I'm really curious. How did you get your strength? I could feel your power as you carried me in. Before Kevin could reply, she asked him, if you haven't gotten it through any special training, did you have any help from someone? Help? Kevin frowned. He thought of the 2 pills Cook had given him. They were supposed to help him restore his strength. Maybe they did something more. What have those pills done to me? Kevin wondered. If you don't want to tell me, I won't force you. But remember one thing. Try not to let anyone see just how much power you have. Otherwise... Officer Emmett yawned and changed the subject. Sit down and rest for a while. I'm a little tired. Then she closed her eyes and fell asleep. I can't believe she trusts me enough to let me in her home like this, Kevin thought to himself. Then he thought again about what Emmett had said. Kevin wondered about the 2 pills Cook had given him, and he quickly took out his phone and called his friend. Cook answered in his deep voice.
Hi, Kevin. What's up?
Mitch, I want to know what was in those pills you gave me, Kevin said directly.
Let me think about it. One of them was supposed to help boost your energy levels, and the other was supposed to help you with your focus, he replied. Then he asked, Why are you suddenly asking me about this? Are you having a problem because of the pills?
No, don't worry. I'm fine. Kevin smiled before adding, Just curious. I'll let you get back to work. Then he sent a quick text to his office to have his car dropped off around the corner from Officer Emmett's house. No explanations necessary. It's good to be the CEO, he thought. Kevin put his phone back in his pocket and looked back at Officer Emmett, who was sleeping soundly in her recliner. He sat back and looked around the room while he wondered what was going on in his body. His eyes fell on the top shelf of her bookcase. There were a lot of martial arts books, guides to natural health, but there were also a couple of old books with tattered spines. Kevin walked over and took them down. The first one he opened was a very old translation of an ancient book on training your ki, your inner power. He was surprised to find that it talked a lot about what Officer Emmett had been saying about training your internal energy. It was a quick read, maybe because of his recent improvement in his focus. Kevin put that book aside and flipped open another one. It talked about the yin and yang, negative and positive energy, and harmony, as well as some ways to make natural medications. Kevin lost track of time and read throughout the night. When Officer Emmett woke up and saw that Kevin was still there, she immediately jumped up from her chair. Why haven't you left yet? Well, you asked me to bring you back here, and then you fell asleep. How could I let you sleep alone in the living room? What if those guys have accomplices and they want to harm you? Kevin explained. Even so, it wasn't appropriate, she said, looking slightly embarrassed. It can be our little secret, Kevin said while leaning back on the sofa. He didn't look like someone who had been up all night. On the contrary, he looked very energetic. Kevin suddenly remembered the pills that Officer Emmett had been forced to swallow the day before, and he asked her, with the concern showing in his voice, How are you doing now? It was only a couple of them. I keep myself in pretty good shape, so I think I'm getting over it, she replied. I just wish I could have developed my internal energy more, like in those books you've been reading, she said as she nodded at the pile of old books that Kevin had taken down from her shelf. "Oh, I'm sure it isn't all that hard," Kevin teased her. Officer Emmett raised an eyebrow. She felt that he didn't know just how long that kind of training could take. "You wouldn't understand if I told you. Anyway, I think it's time for you to leave," she said impatiently. "I have to go to work." Kevin just sat there with a cryptic smile on his face. "Why aren't you leaving yet? Do you want me to call a squad car for you or something?" Her annoyance was starting to show. "I've got something here and I hope it can help you," Kevin said as he slowly took a reddish-brown pill from his pocket. Last night, Kevin had followed the instructions in the book on alternative medicine to come up with something he thought could help Officer Emmett recover more quickly. "Did you use one of the herbal recipes in that book? What's it supposed to do?" Officer Emmett asked. You could tell she had her doubts, but for some reason she trusted Kevin. She was tempted to try it. Kevin had spent the night reading about vitamins and natural medicine. He only knew the basics, but decided to use a recipe in one of the old books to make some herbal medications to help Officer Emmett recover. He offered her a reddish-brown pill that looked a little like the one Cook had given him. "What will it do?" she asked him. "I'm not exactly sure," he answered. Of course, he didn't want to tell her that he'd made it using simple ingredients he found in her kitchen. "You don't know? So what makes you think it can help me?" she said in an exasperated tone. "So are you going to take it or not?" Kevin was about to take the pill back as he spoke, but she snatched it out of his hand. Officer Emmett stared at the pill in her hand. She looked at Kevin and asked him, "You've already taken something like this, haven't you? That's how you got so strong." "If you're not going to take it, then I'd like to have it back," Kevin said. "Who said I don't want it?" She tossed the pill in her mouth and swallowed it with a gulp of water. They waited anxiously for about 5 minutes. Finally, Kevin asked her, "Do you feel anything?" "I feel like I'm going to be another 5 minutes late to work," she remarked. Then she asked him, "Are you sure you followed the recipe right?" "I'm not sure. The one I took was given to me by someone else," Kevin said awkwardly as he scratched his head. It was starting to look helpless. The book sounded serious, but maybe none of the things it talked about actually worked. Just then, Kevin's phone rang. He pulled it out of his pocket, looked at the caller ID, and said, "Lily?" "Where are you? Hurry up and come to Grandma's. My father's back from his trip." Lily's voice sounded a little urgent. "Okay, I'll be there in a little while." Kevin hung up the phone and picked up the 2 old books. Looking at Officer Emmett, he asked her, "Do you mind if I borrow these?" She nodded and said, "Knock yourself out." Then they said goodbye and he headed out the front door. He walked around the corner and found his car. While driving across town to the Jones mansion, Kevin thought about his father-in-law. Oliver Jones had been overseas for the past few years handling family business. Grandma Jones used to dote on Oliver, but after Lily married Kevin and Oliver went overseas, Grandma gradually stopped. For some reason, Kevin felt that it wasn't a good time for Oliver to return. After driving for more than an hour, he finally arrived at the Jones family's mansion. When he saw Kevin enter, Oliver, who was sitting on a big leather chair, waved at him.
"Kevin, come here. Let me take a good look at you."
"Dad," Kevin said as he walked over to him with a smile.
"It's been a long time. You're looking stronger," Oliver said pleasantly.
Jason, who was standing nearby, sneered. "He eats at home every day and doesn't do anything. He must have gotten fat." This remark brought laughter and snickering from most of the Joneses, all except Oliver, whose smile turned into a slight frown. Grandma Jones glared at Kevin, then said to her son, "Oliver, what brings you back after all this time?"
"Mom, I found a great business opportunity for the family," Oliver explained as he stood up excitedly.
That's when Kevin noticed how proud Dorothy looked as she sat next to her husband. Grandma Jones asked in surprise, "What opportunity?"
"Mom, I met a very powerful businessman. All I have to do is send him the amount we agreed on, and half a month later he'll be able to triple our investment," Oliver said excitedly. The family members who were in the room started discussing this with each other. One of his cousins asked him, "Oliver, you chump, what were you thinking?"
Some of the other comments were even worse, but Oliver didn't care what they said. He never lost his smile. He handed his phone to Grandma Jones and reassured her. "Mom, take a look. This is the transfer record between me and my friend." After Grandma Jones saw the financial report, she passed Oliver's phone around the room for everyone to see for themselves. The transfer record showed that as long as Oliver Jones invested a certain sum of money every time, he would receive 3 times that amount after 10 days. One of his nephews asked him, "Uncle Oliver, you aren't laundering money or something, are you?" But everyone knew he was an honest man, and the accounts looked genuine. Grandma Jones slapped the table next to her. "Oliver, it's not that I don't trust you, but our family's business isn't doing that well right now. The most I could give you is $90 million. As you know, it would be wise to watch this investment over time. I think we should be more patient," Grandma Jones said hesitantly. "Mom, this friend of mine is doing development overseas. He's focusing on some real cutting-edge industries. I guarantee that we'll earn a lot of money from this," he said confidently. Then he added, "If we hesitate, he may look for a new partner. It would be a shame for us to miss out on such a fantastic opportunity." Kevin stood up and said, "Dad, I think you should go and check on your friend." Dorothy immediately reprimanded Kevin. "What are you talking about? How can you interrupt your dad when he's speaking? If you don't understand what we're talking about, just sit there with your mouth shut." Dorothy still couldn't bear to look at Kevin, and she was disappointed that Lily refused to divorce him. "Mom, I'm telling the truth, and Dad didn't say exactly what his friend would do with the money. If we invest everything we have, we stand to lose a lot," Kevin explained very seriously. As usual, the rest of the Jones family started criticizing him one after another, saying things like, "Just go home, you don't belong here," and "You don't know what you're talking about." Then Lily whispered to Kevin, "Stop it, Kevin. Dad's finally home again. What if you make him angry?" "Lily, what do you think of Dad's deal with his friend?" Kevin asked gravely. "Of course I don't believe it, Kevin, but we need to support him," Lily pleaded. She didn't know what else to say. And she really didn't believe that anyone would offer her father such a good investment, even his best friend. It had to be a scam. But she just couldn't get herself to disagree with him, especially in front of the entire family. Grandma Jones didn't pay any attention to Kevin's objections. Her eyes lit up and she stared at Oliver and thought about all the money they could make. Grandma Jones finally let out a breath as if she had made up her mind and said, "Oliver, why don't we invest $5 million first?" "Mom, what are you talking about? We aren't some tiny little unknown family. We're one of the most respected families in all of Chicago. If I only invest $5 million, my friend will think that we're not committed," Oliver implored. "He put our family at the top of his list because of our reputation. If we don't show the same faith in him, we may lose the entire deal." They all agreed with him. Nobody wanted to risk being passed over because they were being stingy. They had to commit more than $5 million. "Then how much do you think our family should invest in this opportunity?" Grandma Jones asked him. Oliver heard her and immediately became excited. "Mom, I think we should invest more. We should invest all available funds. Then once we've made enough profit, we can pull back." When Oliver said this, none of the Joneses knew what to do. Even Grandma Jones was uncertain. "Grandma, please don't listen to Uncle Oliver." Matilda was the first to stand up and voice her opinion. "We're not even the richest family in Chicago, let alone the world. There's no way someone would approach us first. This has to be a scam." Oliver got upset with his niece and yelled, "Matilda, I'm talking with your grandmother. Please don't interrupt." Even though Oliver used to be one of the most respected members of the family, he was no longer Grandma Jones's favorite. A lot of the Joneses held a grudge against him. For one thing, they thought his son-in-law Kevin was a deadbeat. They also had a lot of unpleasant things to say about Dorothy and Lily lately. And to top it all off, Oliver had been out of the country for years. "I don't care what you think. This is a scam," Matilda protested. Then Kevin repeated his warning. "Dad, in my opinion, you really ought to think twice about this." When she heard this, Dorothy stood up from her seat, walked over to Kevin, and slapped him in the face. "What are you talking about? Don't you want this family to succeed? Just because you're a leech, it doesn't mean Lily's father is too. If you say another word, you will never be welcome in my home again," she shrieked. Kevin couldn't let it go, even after Dorothy's ultimatum. "But Mom, think about it. This is too good to be true. If it were this easy to make a fortune, nobody in the world would be poor." Dorothy gave Kevin a vicious slap on the other cheek, shouting, "That's it! Get out of here now!" Before Kevin could say anything else, Matilda interrupted him. "Uncle Oliver, you didn't come back home just to let the family get cheated out of millions, did you?" Suddenly, Jason had an idea. The way he saw the situation, Oliver's friend claimed he could triple their money in 10 days. Did he think that they were fools? Of course it would be easy to trick Grandma Jones out of her money. And at first Jason wanted to speak out against the idea like Matilda had. But now he saw an opportunity to chase Lily out of the family and make some extra money for himself. Plus, Oliver was Kevin's father-in-law, and Jason hated Kevin to the core because of all the times he'd made him suffer. He couldn't pass up this chance to get even. So Jason sneered and said, "Matilda, Uncle Oliver has good intentions. How can you say his friend's offer is a fraud?" "Jason, what do you mean?" Grandma Jones said as she turned to look at him. Even though Jason had humiliated Brittany and almost cost the family a fortune, he was still Grandma's favorite. "Grandma, I think this is a good opportunity," Jason said respectfully. He had already come up with a plan. As long as Grandma listened to Oliver and invested the family's money, Jason would be able to funnel company money to his own bank account. This deal his uncle had found was definitely a scam. By the time the family realized all their funds had disappeared, it would look like Oliver was responsible. He and the rest of his immediate family, including Kevin, would be ostracized. Jason figured that nobody would suspect him. Then, once Kevin and Lily were out of the family, he would pay someone to track them down and punish them so he could finally get his revenge. "Jason, have you lost it? Can't you tell this is an obvious scam?" Matilda asked in disbelief. Kevin was about to say something, but Dorothy glared at him angrily, and Lily pulled on his sleeve. He decided to keep quiet for now. "Matilda, I think maybe you've lost it. You actually agree with Kevin?" Jason asked in a snotty tone. He continued, "I don't care what Kevin thinks. He doesn't know anything about business. But you're a Jones. You ought to know better." "It's because I'm a Jones that I'm against this," Matilda shot back angrily. "Matilda, what do you have against me?" Oliver said dejectedly. Matilda was about to say more, but Grandma Jones suddenly slammed her fist on the table. She first gave Kevin a fierce look and then said, "Enough! We're all family. What are you guys arguing about anyway? You sound ridiculous." Grandma Jones looked at Kevin again and her eyes were filled with contempt. What was she going to do now? While everyone watched anxiously, Grandma Jones took a deep breath and said, "I've decided to give all available family assets to Oliver for this investment." "Grandma," Matilda began to plead, but her grandmother interrupted her. "Don't say another word. Matilda, you must remember one thing. Above all else, you're a Jones." Oliver was the most excited one in the room. "Mother, don't worry. We'll easily earn at least $200 million, Oliver said happily. The next step was for Grandma to authorize the Jones family's chief financial officer to transfer every available asset to Oliver's account. As this was happening, Jason looked at his smartphone and smiled. Meanwhile, Kevin closed his eyes and shook his head helplessly. Soon afterward, everyone left the mansion. Lily pulled on Kevin's sleeve as soon as they stepped out of the building and said, "Kevin, do you have any free time now? Let's go home and have a meal with Mom and Dad." "Of course I have time, Lily," Kevin smiled and said. "Wait with them here while I go get the car." "Your boss let you drive his car again?" Lily asked in surprise. She didn't understand. What kind of boss would let his employee drive his own car around all day long? Of course. My boss thinks a lot of me. You should see the one he let me drive today, Kevin said over his shoulder as he walked towards his car. Oliver came over and stood next to Lily. He watched Kevin open the door of a Porsche Panamera, and his eyes grew wide. He commented,
"Kevin isn't doing too bad, is he? Just look at that car."
"That's his boss's car," Dorothy said with contempt. "He could never afford such a nice sedan."
"He has an interesting boss. Where exactly does Kevin work?" Oliver asked suspiciously.
Just then, Kevin pulled up in front of the three of them and greeted them warmly. They all got in and sank into the plush seats of the sports sedan. While pulling out of the mansion's gates, Kevin asked Oliver, "Dad, how long do you plan to stay this time?" "Your dad just got here and you're already talking about him leaving?" Dorothy said coldly. "You've got no common sense." Kevin didn't say anything else. He just focused on driving the car. Lily let out a light sigh. She knew that Kevin would never be able to change Dorothy's opinion of him, no matter what he did. When they reached home, Kevin sat down on the sofa. Dorothy glared at him and said, "Why are you just sitting there? Are you waiting for me to bring you your food? Why don't you go to the kitchen where you belong?" Kevin got up and walked into the kitchen.
"All right, Dorothy, let's stop talking about Kevin," Oliver groaned.
"I'm really tired of him. What's wrong with chewing him out now and then?" Dorothy complained. "You don't know how it's been for the past 3 years. He doesn't do anything around here. Just a good-for-nothing freeloader."
"All right now, that's all in the past," Oliver said as he looked toward the kitchen to see if his son-in-law was in earshot.
When he saw that Kevin wasn't going to come out, Oliver turned to his daughter and said,
"Lily, I came back home to give my family a chance to make a fortune, but I'm also here to talk about your marriage."
"What do you mean, Dad?" Lily asked with a puzzled look on her face.
Oliver said sweetly, "Lily, I met a very rich man while I was overseas. His son has been investing in Chicago for the past few years, which is a wonderful opportunity for us. If you want, I can arrange for the two of you to meet."
As it turned out, Oliver didn't really like Kevin after all. He was embarrassed that his son-in-law had a reputation as such a loafer. "Dad, what are you talking about? I'm already married to Kevin," Lily replied. But she knew what her father was getting at.
"Couldn't you get a divorce?" Oliver asked very seriously. "My friend's son is young and he has a very promising career. Best of all, he doesn't have a girlfriend yet. You could marry him and then we could all move to Europe."
Dorothy was excited to hear this and asked her husband, "Are you serious?"
"Of course. Over the past few years, I haven't had much financial success, but I made a lot of trustworthy friends," Oliver said slowly. "When the time comes, we can move overseas where I can keep you safe."
Before Dorothy could say anything, Lily stood up and said firmly, "Dad, I'm definitely not going to divorce Kevin." "Why are you shouting?" Dorothy said as she jumped up from the sofa. "Tell me, what good qualities does he have? He's useless and annoying, and he doesn't understand anything about the business world. Today, right in front of the whole family, he actually dared to question your father. He simply has no respect for us." "Mom, Kevin is just looking out for the family's interests," Lily replied. It made her anxious to say it, but she just had to. "Actually, I don't believe Dad's investment is a good idea. It's just that I didn't say it out loud in front of everyone. Listen, Mom, Kevin has already made a lot of positive changes. He's even found a good job. Please don't look down on him." "So what if he has a good job?" Dorothy forcefully interrupted Lily as she spoke. "He's never going to do anything with his life, and I'm tired of waiting."
"Lily, you've got to listen to my advice and divorce Kevin," Oliver insisted.
No matter what you say, I won't divorce Kevin," Lily protested. "What's wrong with you?" Dorothy said angrily. "Why don't you want a divorce? Don't you think I'd like to kick him out the door right now?" "If he leaves, I'm leaving too," Lily said courageously. Suddenly, Oliver slammed his fist on the table. He had lost his patience.
Enough! I'm the head of this family and I'll settle this right now. Tomorrow you're going to divorce Kevin, and the day after tomorrow you'll meet my friend's son. After that, I'll handle the paperwork for all of us to move to Europe.
Kevin, who was cutting vegetables in the kitchen, could hear every word of the conversation. He was surprised to see Lily shove open the kitchen door and walk toward him. She grabbed Kevin's hand and turned around to walk out of the room. As she did this, she shouted at her parents, "When you change your mind, I'll come back. With Kevin." "If you're with him, don't bother to come back," Dorothy yelled as she angrily picked up her coffee mug and threw it across the room. Oliver sighed bitterly and said, "How senseless." Lily held Kevin's hand tightly. They kept walking until they were around the corner from her parents' house. When they reached the bus stop, Lily let go of Kevin's hand, sat down on the bench, and cried. Kevin looked at Lily. He had mixed feelings about what was happening. After sitting quietly with her for a long time, he asked softly, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Lily slowly raised her head, wiped the tears from her cheeks, and whispered, "Kevin, I won't give up on you if you don't give up on me." When Kevin heard her say this, he took a deep breath. It made him so happy. He never imagined that Lily would have such a big fight with her parents over him. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. A few minutes later, Lily stood up and looked at Kevin. She said, "Go get the car. We'll go to your place tonight." Kevin looked into Lily's eyes and asked her, "You're really not going back?" "I said that I'll only go back if they change their mind," she explained. Kevin could see that she had made up her mind. Kevin nodded in agreement, turned around, and walked around the corner to get his car. When he opened the door to let Lily in, he asked her, "Are you certain you really want to go to my place? I just want to be sure you are prepared for it." As Kevin started to drive towards Corwin Tower, he was racking his brains trying to figure out how to explain everything to Lily. He had told her that his job included room and board, but he'd only said that to buy some time. If she went to Corwin Tower with him, wouldn't she figure out his secret? He wasn't ready for that. "I'll have to play it by ear," Kevin said to himself. "Why don't you want me to see your apartment? Do you have a mistress already?" Lily asked him. "Lily, that hurts. You should know me better than that," he said with a sigh. "I just hope you like the place." "No matter how dirty and messy your apartment is, it'll be your job to clean it up." After Lily said this, she leaned back in her seat and fell asleep. It had been an exhausting day. Kevin turned the Porsche onto Lakeshore Drive and headed downtown. Every now and then, he took his eyes off the road to look at Lily. Finally, Kevin made up his mind and thought to himself, "Lily, don't worry. As long as you're faithful to me, I'll be faithful to you, no matter what." About a half hour later, Lily slowly opened her eyes. She took one look out the car window and her jaw dropped. "Kevin, where are we? Didn't I ask you to take me to your place?" "Lily, this is where I live," Kevin said as he pointed to the entrance of the luxury tower. "The apartment your boss gave you?" Lily turned her head and looked at Kevin in shock. Kevin knew he had to tell the truth. As he was driving to the Corwin Tower, this was the only solution that he could think of that would work. If he told Lily a lie today, then from now on he would have to tell her countless more lies. So he decided not to hide it anymore. "Lily, if I told you that I bought this place as a gift for you, would you believe me?" Kevin asked her earnestly. Lily didn't know what to say. She began to explain, "I don't." Before she could finish, Kevin interrupted. "You were there the day I bought it." Lily immediately remembered and asked him, "Was it the day you and Garrett had that fight?" She recalled asking Kevin where he'd gotten the black card, but Garrett was being a real bastard, so Kevin never had a chance to explain it to her. However, Lily had always thought that Kevin bought the condo for his boss, not for himself, and especially not for her. "Yes, it was that day," Kevin nodded. After saying this, Kevin got out of the car and walked around to open the door for Lily. After the valet took the Panamera down to the building's garage, Kevin took Lily by the arm and they walked into Corwin Tower together. As she looked up at the beautiful Neo Art Deco entrance hall, He asked her, "Well, what do you think?" Lily didn't answer Kevin's question. Instead, she hung onto his arm tightly. "Kevin, this is your boss's place, right? Is it okay for us to even be here?" Lily asked nervously. She started to worry that they would get in trouble. "Kevin," she said anxiously, "I know you're trying to impress me, but what we're doing is against the law. We have to get out of here. No matter how bad your apartment is, I won't be upset. Let's walk over to your place." Kevin didn't know what to say. He could tell Lily was terrified. "Call your boss to apologize, and then we'll go to your apartment," she pleaded. She didn't know who Kevin's boss was, but she was sure that someone who could afford a place in Corwin Tower had to be very important. Kevin smiled and reassured her. "Don't be nervous. I really do live here." Then he patted Lily's hand gently to comfort her as he walked her over to the private penthouse elevator. "Kevin, please don't lie to me anymore." Lily wept. Her eyes swept around the magnificent room, then she lowered her head and said softly, "We can't possibly afford to live in a place like this." "Why don't you believe me? I swear I really live here." Kevin pulled out his key card and swiped it for the elevator. He gently took Lily's arm and stepped in with her. As the elevator rose to the top floor, he suddenly had an idea. "Lily," he explained, "I helped the company sign a business deal worth billions. My boss was so happy he gave me an enormous bonus. So I bought this condo." "Are you serious? You're really not lying to me." Lily looked at Kevin and he could tell that she'd still had her doubts. As the door opened and they stepped into the living room, he said, "We've been married for almost 3 years. Have I ever lied to you?" Lily dried her eyes and looked around the lavishly decorated living room with the floor-to-ceiling view of Chicago's skyline and Grant Park. It was true that he'd never lied to her. When she thought about it, since she had watched Kevin buy the place, she knew that it was worth $8 million. If Kevin really helped the company sign a billion-dollar business deal, it was definitely possible for his boss to give him at least that much. "So, then you really did buy this place?" she confirmed. "Of course. For you. For us," Kevin said with a smile. When Lily heard this, she broke into a wide grin and pulled Kevin to the window to look out on the city. "Kevin, I'm going to call my mother right now and tell her you bought the nicest condo in Chicago," Lily said excitedly. But Kevin wasn't sure that would be a good idea. "When Mom and Dad find out you own a place like this, they'll definitely change their opinion of you," Lily exclaimed as she hugged Kevin tightly and gave him a kiss. "I think we should wait a while, Lily," Kevin replied. He thought for a moment and said, "You just had a knockdown drag-out with your parents. If you tell them now, they'll just think that I borrowed it from my friends." Lily got a sad look in her eyes when he said this. "I guess that makes sense," she said. "I just don't know why they hate you so much." "It doesn't matter right now. As long as I'm willing to work hard, one day your parents will come around and accept me," Kevin said as he reached out and ran his fingers through Lily's hair. Just then, Kevin's phone vibrated in his pocket. He took a look at the caller ID and saw that it was Cook. While Lily explored the condo, Kevin sat down and answered the call. "Mitch, what's going on?"
"Kevin, do you have any free time this evening?" Cook asked him.
"Sure. What's up?" Kevin asked curiously.
"It's Adriana's birthday tonight. She's having a party at my hotel and she asked me to invite you," Cook explained.
"Okay, no problem." Kevin thought for a second and then added, "And you don't need to send anyone to pick me up." After he hung up, Kevin looked over at Lily, who was standing on the stairs and gazing up at the top floor. The apartment was like something you only saw in an architecture magazine. Kevin decided not to take Lily with him to the party. He didn't want to risk having her find out the rest of his secret. Not right now. "Lily, I've got something to do and I need to head out. I might be back pretty late," Kevin told her. "No problem. You go ahead and do your work," she replied. Lily felt that Kevin's boss was really going to help him on his meteoric rise to the top, and she didn't want to get in the way. With his boss's help, he could finally be accepted by the Jones family. Great. If you need anything, just use the intercom over there. The concierge in the lobby can get you whatever you need. I'll give you a tour when I get back," he explained. Then he got in the elevator to head down to the valet to pick up his car. Kevin stopped at an upscale mall along the way to buy Adriana a sparkling diamond necklace. Of course, it wasn't expensive for Adriana, but he wanted to give her a little something as a token of his appreciation. Then he headed to the Whistler Hotel. When he got out of his car, Drake held the door and gave him a warm greeting.
"Mr. Williams, what a pleasant surprise. Mr. Cook asked me to wait for you here."
This was quite a contrast from the nasty threats that Drake had made when they first met. But Mitch had straightened him out, and now he treated Kevin with far more respect. Kevin smiled and said, "It's good to see you, Drake. I hope you've been staying out of trouble."
"I'm at your service, Mr. Williams," he replied. "The party is just getting started. Mr. Cook will join you soon."
Drake stepped aside and gestured for Kevin to head inside. "Where's Adriana?" Kevin inquired.
"President Wright is getting ready upstairs. She wants to be presentable when she greets all the VIPs, Drake said with a smile.
When Kevin entered the banquet hall, he saw that, even though it was still pretty early, a lot of guests had already arrived. That made sense. The West Chicago International Group was one of the leading corporations in the Midwest. There was a table in the corner covered with neatly arranged gifts. Kevin reached out to put the necklace on the pile, and he was interrupted by one of the hotel staff. "Hello, sir. Please follow me after you finish. We're asking all the bodyguards to move to a private room," the employee said politely. Before Kevin could say anything, Drake got a furious look on his face and asked him,
"Who said this gentleman was a bodyguard?"
"Sir, I don't know," he said to Drake in an apologetic tone. Mitchell Cook was the most respected person in the Whistler Hotel, but Drake was close behind. Still, even though Drake had the same last name, the only Mr. Cook at the hotel was Mitchell Cook. But Drake didn't know anything about managing a hotel. His specialty was dealing with anyone who dared to commit a crime on the property, and he was known for his cruel methods.
"Why are you apologizing to me? You should be apologizing to Mr. Williams," Drake berated him.
The young man had noticed Kevin earlier, but saw how simply he was dressed and assumed he was just some big shot's bodyguard dropping off a birthday present. He'd worked at the Whistler Hotel for 2 years, but had never made a blunder like this.
"Well, what are you waiting for?" Drake scolded him again.
"I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. Please accept my apologies," he stammered. "No problem. I get that a lot," Kevin said casually.
"Isn't it time for you to return to your station?" Drake said with a glare.
Just then they heard someone call out for help. "Please call a doctor. President Archer just fainted." The guests formed a circle around the woman and began to discuss what they should do. Drake squeezed through the crowd and saw her lying on the floor. He furrowed his brow and said,
"President Archer?"
"Do you know her?" Kevin asked hesitantly as his eyes were scanning the surroundings. It seemed as if he was looking for something.
"Mr. Williams, you might not know this, but her name is Gwen Archer. She's the CEO of Gwendom Real Estate, the biggest agency in Chicago."
Drake explained quickly as he tried to see how he could help.
"Her brother, Dominic Archer, is the head of one of the largest crime syndicates in the city."
Suddenly, someone in the crowd raised their voice. "Is there a doctor here? Please come and take a look at President Archer." "I'm a doctor. Please let me in," said a tall woman as she made her way through the crowd.
"Dr. Willow?" Drake's face lit up as he said, "Sorry to trouble you. Please have a look at President Archer."
Gwen Archer had been personally invited by Adriana. If anything happened to her, the hotel and West Chicago Group would have a lot to explain to Gwendom Real Estate. Everyone was surprised to see Dr. Serafina Willow rendering aid. She was famous, not just in Chicago, as the medical director of Downtown General. She probably had the best medical reputation in the entire city. Dr. Willow didn't pay any attention to what the guests were saying. Her focus right now was Gwen Archer. She asked one of her companions to get her medical bag and then knelt down to start taking the poor woman's vitals so she could assess the situation. A few minutes later, Adriana arrived with a few of her bodyguards. "Dr. Willow, how is she doing?" Adriana asked with concern. The lack of ventilation isn't helping. Please ask everyone to step back and give her some space, she replied with a solemn expression. When Adriana heard this, she immediately motioned for everyone to give them some room. Kevin, who was standing next to Drake, watched this intently. It reminded him of something he'd just read in one of the books on natural medicine. Gwen still wasn't responding, and everyone began to whisper to each other. Was it food poisoning? Did she have some kind of medical condition? They didn't want to say anything out loud because they were afraid of her brother Dominic. Drake walked up and asked her, "Dr. Willow, has there been any improvement?" The doctor seemed a bit embarrassed. She said, "I think we should transport her to the hospital for testing. All I can do is stabilize her." Adriana nodded and asked Drake to send for a car. It would be faster than an ambulance and the doctor could ride with her. Suddenly, Kevin walked up and put his arm on Drake's shoulder, saying, "There's no need to run any tests on her." Some of the onlookers recognized Kevin as the deadbeat who had married his way into the Jones family. They figured he was just trying to get attention and look important. As they were making the usual nasty comments inspired by the lies that Jason had been spreading about Kevin, their chatter immediately stopped when they saw Adriana walk up to Kevin and say, "Mr. Williams." The entire hall immediately fell silent. "Happy birthday, Adriana," Kevin exclaimed as he smiled and handed her the present that he hadn't gotten a chance to put on the table. "Thank you, Mr. Williams," Adriana answered as she smiled and accepted the gift. Drake interrupted politely to ask him, "Mr. Williams, why don't you let me send President Archer to the hospital?" "Are you a doctor?" Adriana asked in confusion. Kevin shook his head and simply replied, "No." "So if you've never studied medicine, why are you questioning my decision?" Dr. Willow asked abruptly. She was a little irked by this. Actually, Dr. Willow wasn't sure herself that Gwen needed to go to the hospital. She couldn't find any reason for her not to be waking up yet, so she assumed that some tests might help to solve the mystery. "I'm not questioning your medical skills. It seems to me that her condition is unique and the hospital won't be able to do any more than we can right here," Kevin said politely. The doctor ignored Kevin and turned to look at Adriana. "President Wright, are you going to put up with this young man's nonsense?" Some of the onlookers started to mumble again. They were curious to see how this would turn out. "Dr. Willow, I would trust this man with my very life," Adriana said firmly. The doctor wasn't sure how to respond. She just looked at Adriana in disbelief. But she probably wouldn't leave the party. She had pressed for an invitation just so that she could make friends with Adriana. "So, Mr. Williams, what do you think we should do?" Adriana asked Kevin. Kevin looked around the room and then pointed to the scented candles that were burning on all of the tables and the centerpieces. "Drake, please carry President Archer to the table by the window over there and open it wide. Then have your assistants put out all those candles and take them into the kitchen." Drake hesitated a little at this odd request, but after seeing Adriana nod her head, he ordered everyone to do exactly as Kevin had said. "Mr. Williams, can you please explain why you want to do this?" Adriana asked with a puzzled look on her face. "Of course," Kevin smiled and said. "I noticed the candles when I walked in. They give a nice atmosphere, but I'm certain that President Archer is sensitive to some of the ingredients that are used to produce the strong fragrance. I recognize one of the smells as something that is used in herbal medicine to lower blood pressure. She doesn't need any expensive tests, just some fresh air." They all watched to see if Gwen was showing any improvement. After Gwen Archer passed out, Kevin suggested that they move her to a table by the window and then open it wide. Next, he had them blow out all the centerpiece candles and take them into the kitchen. Adriana and the others still had their doubts, but they were hopeful that this would help. Otherwise, they would have to rush Gwen to the hospital. Some of them whispered rudely to each other because they thought Kevin had no idea what he was talking about. From what Jason Jones had said, Kevin was a complete failure in everything that he tried. Drake overheard some of them who were standing nearby, and he was less than pleased. He turned around and roared angrily, "Whoever makes the next snide remark about Mr. Williams is going to take a swim in the Chicago River." That certainly wiped the smirks off their faces. But Adriana still didn't understand. Mr. Williams, could you please explain again why you had President Archer taken over to the window? It's very simple, he explained. President Archer had a reaction to one of the ingredients in the scented candles. I can smell an herb that can lower blood pressure. She's obviously more sensitive to it than anyone else here. I'm not sure exactly why, though. Dr. Willow still wasn't convinced. There didn't seem to be any scientific basis to what he was saying. President Wright, in my medical opinion, you'll need to transport this woman to an emergency room immediately, Dr. Willow said with a serious expression. Just then, a group of guests walked into the room led by a tall, powerful-looking man.
Please step aside, Dominic Archer ordered the crowd.
The guests respectively made way for him.
Who put my sister on this table? He bellowed.
Mr. Archer, please don't worry. I can explain this, Adriana said calmly. There wasn't a trace of fear in her voice.
President Wright, I don't need an explanation. I just want to know why my sister isn't on her way to the hospital. What are you trying to pull here? Dominic asked sternly.
The onlookers started to throw Kevin straight under the bus.
It's his fault, one of them blurted out. He's that useless son-in-law who's been leeching off the Jones family for years.
Jones family? Which Jones family? Dominic asked. Then his eyes lit up when he remembered what he'd heard about Kevin. He looked at him and snarled.
Are you responsible for this? Dominic, I'm warning you. You need to show more respect to Mr. Williams, Drake said as he stepped between Dominic and Kevin.
Dominic and Drake had always been rivals in Chicago's underworld, but the two of them had always kept their conflicts quiet. They'd never battled face to face. Not yet.
Drake, since when do you stand up for such a useless piece of crap? Dominic asked him.
Drake, please let me handle this. I can explain it to him. Kevin pleaded as he stepped forward to try and convince the large man that this was the best course of action.
Please be careful what you say to him. He admires strength most of all.
It may be useless to try and reason with him, Drake said to Kevin quietly. Drake and Dominic had been in competition for years, and he was a good judge of the man's character. But if Kevin was injured under Drake's protection, Cook would never forgive him.
So, what do you have to say, you son of a bitch?
Dominic asked nastily as he looked at his sister Gwen lying on the banquet hall table. Drake started to reply, but he was interrupted by Kevin. Your sister is fine. Her blood pressure dropped for a while, but I can guarantee that she'll be up and back on her feet in less than 5 minutes.
If she's not, I promise I won't let you leave this hotel in one piece, Dominic threatened him.
Then he glared at Adriana and added,
President Wright, you'll have some explaining to do too. Dominic, how dare you take on that rude tone of voice with my friends?
Drake said arrogantly. Nobody dared to step between the two of them to interfere. Just when it looked like the two of them were about to start swinging at each other, Gwen suddenly coughed. They were all amazed that Kevin had been right, especially the ones who had been swayed by Jason's gossip about him. Dominic grunted at Kevin and Drake. Then he quickly walked over to his sister and asked her,
Gwen, how do you feel? Are you okay?
Dominic, when did you get here? Gwen shook her head slightly before continuing. It felt like the room was spinning and then everything went dark. Her voice was still faint, but everyone could hear her clearly. Most of them still didn't believe Kevin was right. Dominic frowned a little and looked at Kevin. President Archer, think about this carefully. Did you see anything before you fainted? Kevin asked her.
Stop pretending to know what happened. My sister woke up all by herself. This has nothing to do with your nonsense,
Dominic shouted indignantly. A lot of the guests who were watching this nodded their heads in agreement. They also thought that Gwen waking up right now was just a coincidence. Gwen thought for a moment and then slowly opened her mouth to reply. Now that you mention it, just before I passed out, I was starting to have a hard time breathing. There was a strange smell in the air and I just couldn't seem to breathe. I took the candle from the table and smelled it to see if that was where it was coming from. Suddenly, everyone felt extremely awkward. How could they all have been so wrong? but somehow a few of them still blame Kevin and the Jones family. That makes sense, Kevin explained. The candles were made with some ingredients that are used in herbal remedies to lower blood pressure. I asked one of the waiters to bring me one of the boxes from the kitchen. He pulled one of the candles out of the box and smelled it, as he explained. This has been made with a powerful combination of ingredients. Usually scented candles can be pretty safe with enough air circulation, but these look like they're homemade. He handed one of the candles to Dr. Willow to examine. Dr. Willow took the candle and checked it out for herself. Then she nodded her head. Based on this slightly more scientific explanation, she was a little embarrassed for having been so rude to Kevin earlier. With Dominic's help, Gwen slowly got down from the table and walked over to Kevin. She was still confused and asked him, "There are so many people in this room. Why am I the only one who fainted?" Some of the guests were wondering the same thing. Lots of them had been in the room for at least an hour. A couple of them had even leaned down to inhale the fragrance of the candles. Kevin reflected for a moment, trying to recall what he had read. Then he looked at Gwen and speculated. "President Archer, I've learned that in high concentrations for someone who's sensitive, the effect can be very serious." "What the hell are you talking about?" Dominic interrupted. Kevin sighed. "President Archer, it's probably just a bit of susceptibility you have." "All right, that's enough." Dominic couldn't hold it in any longer. He gestured for his bodyguards to come over. A second later, Kevin was surrounded. Drake stepped forward to put himself between Kevin and the men. "All of you stop," Gwen snapped. "I think he's right about this. I've always been kind of sensitive about some things. Remember when we were kids?" She looked into her brother's eyes. The explanation seemed to make sense to Dominic, but he would never apologize to Kevin in front of everyone. It wasn't in his nature. Instead, he asked someone to put the gift that he'd brought for Adriana on the table in the corner. Then he helped his sister walk out of the hotel. "Mr. Williams, that was very interesting. Have you been studying this subject for very long?" Adriana's eyes were full of admiration. "I just happened to be studying New Age medicine recently. I'm nowhere near an expert." Kevin smiled and added, "Please go mingle with your guests. This is your evening." "Okay, Mr. Williams," Adriana agreed. Then she leaned in and told him, "There's a private room upstairs for a small group of us. Cook should be up there in a little while. Why don't you make your way up there and I'll join you later?" "Okay, I'll head up there with Drake," Kevin said enthusiastically. About 15 or 20 minutes later, Cook arrived at the hotel and, after checking on things at the party, he went upstairs to join his friends. Gilbert Rhodes and Emo Squire showed up too. They all spent a lot of time catching up. Finally, after all the guests had left the banquet hall, Adriana joined her friends and they all chatted until early in the morning. That night, because Kevin was tired from such a long day, and because he had drunk a little too much to be safe on the road, he spent the rest of the night at the hotel. Early the next morning, right after he woke up, Kevin got a call from Lily. "Hi, Lily. Are you doing okay?" "Kevin, please come home quickly. I need a ride to Grandma's place." Lily sounded very anxious. "What's the matter?" Kevin immediately realized something bad had happened. "My dad's friend disappeared right after he got all the money, so now..." Her voice trailed off. Then she said, "You should take care of your business first. I'll take a taxi there myself." Then Lily hung up the phone in a hurry. Kevin was sure he knew what had happened. When Oliver told them all about the investment, he and Matilda had been against it. But the rest of the members of the Jones family were only thinking about how much money they could make in this get-rich-quick scheme. Nobody was willing to listen to reason. Just as Kevin was thinking about how pleasing it would be to see the Jones family suffer a little, he thought of another problem. Since this whole idea had been suggested by Oliver, Lily might suffer from the backlash. Kevin said to himself, "Lily, I'm only helping the Jones family because of you. This is definitely the first and last time." Then he took out his phone and made a call to his old friend Tyler Dawn. "Mr. Williams, it's wonderful to hear from you again. I was beginning to think that something had happened to you." Hearing his colleague's playful tone, Kevin couldn't help breaking into a grin. "Don't be ridiculous," Kevin told him. "Tyler, I need your help with something."
"What? You need my help again?" his friend answered mischievously. "Seriously, what can I do for you, Kevin?"
"I want you to contact the Jones family in Chicago and discuss a partnership. But I want you to do it using the KWTD Corporation's name, not mine." Several years ago, Kevin invested a large sum of money with his friend Tyler, and they formed a company called the KWTD Corporation. They were in a hurry, so they didn't have time to research a good corporate name. They just used their initials. At first, the company only did import and export business, but over the past 6 years, Tyler had built KWTD into one of the top companies in the country, and it was definitely the top import-export company. However, the real boss of KWTD had always been Kevin. Other than him and Tyler, no one else knew about it. It was important for Kevin to hold on to the company, so he was careful not to mention it to anyone when he was driven out of his family. That's how much he cared about Lily.
"Okay, Kevin, I'll get on that right away. It just so happens that I've been working on a project in Chicago lately, so it'll be no problem for me to drop in on the Jones family personally."
They discussed a few more details before hanging up. Kevin couldn't help wondering how the Jones family would react if they found out that he was behind all of this. While Kevin was setting up the deal with Tyler, all the Joneses were rushing to the family mansion. Grandma Jones was sitting in the big chair in the middle of the room looking despondent. Oliver was standing in front of everybody looking fearful and very ashamed. "So, Oliver, where did your friend go?" Grandma Jones asked him sharply. Usually the Joneses would mutter to each other, but they were beside themselves this time. One of his cousins shouted, "Where's all the money you promised?" Another one yelled, "Unbelievable! You lost everything in just one night." The crowd looked like they wanted to eat him alive. "Please don't worry," Lily said in a panic. "My dad has already called the police. They'll track him down soon." Dorothy anxiously tried to appeal to them, saying, "We're all family. Let's talk about this peacefully. As long as we find him, we'll get our money back." But their pleas fell on deaf ears. The family was too furious with Oliver right now. Grandma Jones gave Oliver a sad look and said, "You've really disappointed me." The discussion turned to the next step they would take. Having lost all their liquid assets, the family was on the brink of ruin. And it was so much money, over $100 million, that there was no way Oliver could ever pay them back by himself. It looked hopeless. If Grandma Jones hadn't been in the room, they might have gotten violent.
"Mom, I really had no idea it would turn out like this. I transferred the money to my friend last night, but I couldn't contact him this morning," Oliver explained.
Of course, Oliver had been fooled, but the family didn't believe his explanation. As they became more and more emotional, a few of them started rolling up their sleeves. They looked like they wanted to take a swing at Oliver, whether Grandma was there or not. Just then, everyone turned to the entrance as it was announced that Bella Ortez and Eugene Kim had arrived. They were financial partners with the Jones family. There were also some Jones Enterprise clients who wanted to speak with them. This was too important, so they all came straight to the mansion instead of waiting to meet in the corporate office. Before anyone could react, the large group entered the Jones mansion's main hall, where it was obvious that Oliver had just been called on the carpet. Bella Ortez was the first to speak. She said glumly, "I'm sorry to inform you that our board just had an emergency meeting. We've decided to end our association with your company." Grandma Jones was shocked. She asked Bella, "Why would you do that? We've been working together for so many years." Before Bella could say anything, Eugene Kim followed suit and said, "It looks like President Ortez is trying to spare your feelings, so she hasn't told you the real reason that we need to end our relationship with your company." Kim got straight to the point. "We have a reliable report that the Jones Family's corporation has been cheated out of all its assets. To put it bluntly, we do not want to be drawn into your bankruptcy. We hope that you can see this is purely a business decision." Grandma Jones' lip quivered as she replied, "President Kim, you've gone too far.
Our situation isn't as desperate as you think. Can you please reconsider?" Bella responded to this request with a directness that left no room for doubt. "I'm sorry, but we have no choice. According to our contract, we are requesting only our initial outlay of funds." As soon as she finished speaking, the rest of the group spoke up to request their capital too. They realized that the Jones family would be unable to repay them, and the discussion turned to selling off the Jones family's real estate holdings, including the mansion. The Joneses knew that they were ruined and started arguing with their former partners and clients. Suddenly, Grandma Jones slammed the table hard and shouted, "That's enough! What's the point of arguing? All that we're asking is clearly laid out in our contracts. We have no choice now that the Jones family and your corporation are now—" Bella Ortiz didn't finish her sentence, but everyone understood what she meant. Grandma Jones let out a long sigh. "President Ortiz, President Kim, don't worry. We will definitely reimburse you. But can you please give us a few days? After all, we've been business partners for many years, and we need some time to raise such a large sum of money." "Agreed. Out of respect for you, Mrs. Jones, we will give you 5 days." After saying this, Bella turned around and walked towards the door. Before leaving, President Kim added, "Mrs. Jones, doesn't your granddaughter's husband know Mitchell Cook and Adriana Wright? Perhaps you can ask them for help. Remember, if we don't see our money in 5 days, there will be serious consequences for all of you." After they had all left, Grandma Jones sat back in her chair and rubbed her temples. How could they raise over $50 million in just 5 days? At the same time, they were also trying to track down the $100 million that had been stolen by Oliver's friend. It didn't look good. Not to mention the fact that they had no idea if Mitchell Cook and President Wright would even agree to help them. Even though they obviously had great respect for Kevin, it was impossible for Grandma Jones to ask them for help. That's when someone suggested, "Why don't we ask Kevin to approach Mr. Cook and President Wright for us?" This seemed to be their only solution, but nobody knew if it would even be possible. They certainly weren't on good terms with Kevin right now, to say the least. As they were discussing their limited options, a striking-looking man in a dark suit walked in. The man slowly walked to the middle of the room and said, "I'd like to speak with Mrs. Victoria Jones." "I'm Mrs. Jones. May I ask who you are?" Grandma asked with a slight frown. She didn't recognize the man, so she was fairly certain that he wasn't someone who was currently doing business with the Jones family. The man replied in a friendly tone of voice, "My name is Tyler Dawn. I'm the CEO of the KWTD Corporation." As soon as he finished speaking, the room became filled with an excited buzz of conversation. This was a shocking development. Everyone in the entire country had heard of the KWTD Corporation. They also knew that the company president, Tyler Dawn, rarely showed his face in public. He was a very private man. Grandma Jones was stunned. She had never expected to meet such a famous business tycoon, especially right here in the Jones mansion. Tyler was unimpressed by their reaction. The Jones family didn't have the best reputation in Chicago, but he trusted Kevin, so he continued to be pleasant to them. If his friend hadn't asked him this favor, he was pretty sure he wouldn't even be talking to Grandma Jones. "Mr. Dawn, what brings you here today?" Grandma Jones asked nervously. While they were talking, some of Tyler's assistants walked in, and one of them brought over an empty chair for him to sit in. Tyler sat down and casually explained, "Grandma Jones, I hope you don't mind if I call you that. Please don't be nervous. I came here to discuss a joint venture that should be profitable for all of us." Everyone became excited when they heard him say this. "Mr. Dawn, how do we fit into your plans?" Grandma Jones was starting to get a little short of breath. With the help of the KWTD Corporation, the Jones family would be able to easily pull out of this crisis, and she wouldn't be forced to ask Kevin for help. "It's very simple. I know that you currently have no available funds, so I'm prepared to invest $300 million to set up an import-export company in Chicago," Tyler explained. As soon as he finished saying this, everyone looked at him enthusiastically. "What are your conditions, Mr. Dawn?" Grandma Jones asked him somberly. Except for the fiasco with Oliver's investment, she wasn't usually very trusting. This sounded too good to be true.
The conditions are actually very simple. All you would have to do is handle the day-to-day activities of the company. In exchange, I only want 60% of the Jones family shares, Tyler said casually. You know that you're in a dire situation. $300 million would not only pay off your debt, but put you in a position to expand your family's business. For a moment, the entire room fell silent. Grandma Jones thought long and hard before answering. Mr. Don, you understand the situation perfectly. However, don't you think that the conditions are a bit extreme? Grandma Jones, you know very well that the family's assets are worth $300 million, Tyler said very seriously. This is a very fair offer. If you can't accept my conditions, then I'll move on. I'm sure there are people in Chicago who would be willing to sign on with KWTD.
Without waiting for Grandma Jones to speak, Tyler continued.
To be honest, I could easily walk away from this deal. I run a business, not a charity. You have 3 minutes to consider my offer.
Everyone in the room turned and stared at Grandma Jones. They all knew that without this opportunity, they would be finished. Grandma Jones gritted her teeth and replied hesitantly, All right, Mr. Don, I agree to your conditions. Suddenly, the room broke into lively debate. Some of them were against it. They knew Tyler was taking advantage of them, but they also knew that they were facing liquidation and bankruptcy. If they didn't jump at this offer, it would just go to someone else. Stop, Grandma Jones shouted. I've decided. The discussion is closed.
A wise decision, Tyler said. I'll have my attorneys draw up the contract and arrange for the transfer of funds.
Tyler walked out, followed by his assistants. 20 minutes later, while riding in his limousine, Tyler read through the contract and financial plan on his laptop. Then he pulled out his phone and called Kevin.
Kevin, everything's been set up according to your instructions. $300 million for 60% of the shares in the Jones Family's Corporation, he reported coolly.
Thank you, Tyler. I hope this goes well for you, Kevin replied calmly.
If you don't have anything else, I won't take up any more of your time.
After saying this, Tyler hung up the phone. Kevin took a moment to think about what he had just done. He put his phone in his pocket and headed for the exit. Just as he walked out of the Whistler Hotel, a black car pulled up in front of him. 2 men dressed in black suits quickly got out of the car and called to him.
Mr. Williams, our employer would like to meet with you.
Dominic Archer? Kevin raised his eyebrows and asked.
Please come with us.
The men in black didn't answer Kevin's question. They opened the rear door of their limousine and gestured for him to get in. Kevin shrugged and got into the car. As they drove along, Kevin thought back on a question he'd asked Cook just last night. He was wondering how Dominic Archer compared to Drake. As it turned out, most of Drake's strength came from having Cook's support. However, Dominic Archer was different. He relied on his own strength. So Drake and Dominic were pretty much equal. Half an hour later, they arrived at a luxurious mansion. When Kevin entered the foyer, he saw Dominic stretched out on a sofa in the library. Glad you could make it, Dominic said as he glanced at Kevin. Mr. Archer, I don't understand why you've called me here so early in the morning, Kevin asked candidly. I know I can be a little headstrong, but in our family we know how to repay kindness. You really helped my sister yesterday, so I'd like to give you something. Dominic Archer stood up and motioned for one of his aides to place a box in front of Kevin. Yesterday at President Wright's party, my sister and I could tell that you're interested in the miraculous benefits of herbal medicine. Dominic walked over to Kevin and opened the box. He said, We have connections with a research lab that is developing some very powerful herbal ingredients. I believe that you'll find the contents of this box extremely helpful. Really? Kevin replied. He was surprised at this turn of events. Then I guess I should say thank you, Kevin said quietly. Dominic Archer waved his hand and said, No need to thank me. I'm just returning the favor. Kevin looked in the box for a few seconds and then said, I would never have expected the two of us to have something in common. But he couldn't help wondering what else Dominic may want from him. While Kevin stepped outside of the Whistler Hotel, a black limousine pulled up and the driver asked him to get in.
They drove him to Dominic's mansion where he and Kevin discussed advanced herbal supplements. Dominic offered him a special blend that he said would increase his strength. "I've been interested in natural ways to increase my strength and focus," Dominic explained. "It's made a huge difference in my ability to succeed in business." When Kevin heard this, a faint smile appeared on his face. "If I offered you something that could help you reach your goal, how would you repay me?" "Are you joking?" Dominic retorted. "Trust me, there are no shortcuts in this process. It takes time and effort." "What if I could help give you an advantage?" Kevin said as he smiled and took out a pill of his pocket. It was one of the pills that he had made from the recipe in Officer Emmett's old book. "This combination that I discovered can be very effective." Dominic glanced at the pill in Kevin's hand. If it had the effect that Kevin claimed, it could help him reach his goals of having more energy and mental focus. In his business, you could never have enough of that. But he really didn't believe that Kevin would have access to something like this, especially based on the rumors that he'd heard about him. "What do you think?" Kevin asked with a smile. "Keep it," Dominic replied rudely. "Then I'll be on my way," Kevin said as he took the box and stood up to leave. Before Kevin got to the door, Dominic stopped him. "Is that pill of yours really that effective?" Dominic asked Kevin. It was clear that the man had his doubts, but he was intrigued enough to consider trying it. "Since you don't believe me, there's no point in trying to convince you," Kevin answered. Dominic hesitated for a moment before he continued. "How much do you want for it?" "What do you mean?" Kevin asked in shock. "I mean, what's your price?" Dominic asked again. Actually, Dominic still didn't believe that Kevin's pill would work, and knowing that Kevin was in the Jones family didn't help. But he just couldn't pass up this chance. He already took the special supplements that had been developed for him, and he watched his lifestyle. Everything he did was driven by his will to be better than his competition, some of whom could be vicious, considering the circles he moved in. Dominic had also spent years training in the martial arts, but he was also fighting against the aging process. It was worth a try. "Mr. Archer, I know you're rich and powerful, but you can't solve everything with money," Kevin said coolly. "Just name your price," Dominic said stubbornly. Kevin didn't answer right away. He thought about it for a second and said, "$500. "Okay, $500,000. Deal," Dominic said right away. Kevin couldn't help looking surprised. $500,000 for a simple herbal pill? He was afraid to tell Dominic that he actually meant just $500. Maybe Williams Media should drop the entertainment industry and switch to this, Kevin thought to himself. Dominic slowly walked up to Kevin and told him, "Money isn't a problem, but if your pill doesn't work, you know what will happen to you." The man's posture and tone were coldly threatening, but not only did Kevin not show any sign of fear, he even smiled more broadly. "Don't worry, I always make sure that my customers are happy," Kevin said as he took out the pill again. But just when Dominic reached for it, Kevin suddenly took a step back. "What's going on? Do you think I won't pay you?" Dominic snarled. "Mr. Archer, I didn't say that I would give it to you for a measly $500,000, Kevin said mischievously. "What other conditions do you have?" Dominic asked. He saw that Kevin wanted a bargain. With his other hand, Kevin pointed at the small wooden box on the coffee table. He had noticed the ring inside the box as he walked in the room earlier. For some reason, he wanted it. "You want it?" Dominic glanced at the ring and gave Kevin a strange look. He walked over to the coffee table, picked up the box, and tossed it to Kevin. "So all you really wanted was a ring?" Dominic said with a sneer. Then he called his aide over to have the money transferred to Kevin. After they'd concluded their deal, Dominic had his driver take Kevin back to the Whistler Hotel. As he rode along, Kevin looked out the window and thought about what had just happened. He just sold one of his herbal pills for $500,000 and a ring. Maybe it would be worth looking into this further. After stopping to pick up his car, Kevin headed back to his penthouse. When he got home, Lily was sitting on the sofa. As soon as she saw him step out of the elevator, she immediately stood up and exclaimed, "Kevin,
you're finally back." "What's wrong? Did you really miss me that much?" Kevin replied gently. Lily rolled her eyes and said, "You came back just in time. I need you to go someplace with me." Kevin nodded and they headed down to the lobby to send for his car. Since things had been going so well, he'd added to his car collection. Lily's eyes lit up when she saw the sleek blue Pagani Roadster. As they pulled onto Lakeshore Drive, Kevin asked Lily, "Where are we going exactly?" "My mom is having a reunion with some of her school pals. When she saw that everyone else was bringing their children, she called me too," Lily replied softly. "It's at a cafe on the north side. I've got it set in my GPS. Just head north along the lake for a little while and I'll tell you where to turn left. It's near Evanston." "If your mom's classmates will be there, do you think it's okay for me to come along?" Kevin asked uneasily. "I'll understand if you don't want to see her. Just drop me off and you can head back home," Lily said sadly. Kevin smiled but didn't say anything else about it. After about a half hour, they arrived at the cafe. The event was being held in a private room in the back. When Lily entered, Dorothy was chatting with a few of her old classmates. Upon seeing her daughter, she smiled broadly. Then, when she saw Kevin, her smile immediately left her face. However, in front of so many of her old classmates, Dorothy couldn't kick Kevin out of the place. "Dorothy, is this your daughter? She's so beautiful," her friend exclaimed. A couple of her friends had heard that Lily was in charge of Brittany Davis's account at Williams Media, and they were very impressed. All the praise brought Dorothy's smile back. Then her friends introduced their own children. It seemed they were all successful business executives and doctors. Then one of Dorothy's friends looked at Kevin and asked loudly, "So who is this young man?" The woman who was asking about Kevin was Iris Reed. Ever since she and Dorothy were children, the two of them liked to show off to each other. The moment Iris saw Kevin, she'd figured out who he was. It seemed that everyone in their circles knew about Dorothy's good-for-nothing son-in-law. Everyone looked at Kevin. Dorothy stopped smiling and gave Kevin a disgusted look. Lily suddenly stood up and introduced him to everyone with a smile. "This is my husband, Kevin." "So you're Dorothy's son-in-law." Iris deliberately emphasized the word son-in-law. "He's very handsome," Iris said to Lily. Turning to Kevin, she asked, "Where do you work? What's your position?" "I work for a small company downtown," Kevin said casually. "I help my boss with his accounts," he added. He could tell what Iris was trying to do, but he didn't want to play her game. "A small company should have a name, shouldn't it? If you help your boss with his accounts, you must have some kind of title." Iris wouldn't drop the subject until she was satisfied. "I guess you could call me a clerk," Kevin replied modestly. Nobody was impressed, and it showed on their faces. "I guess it doesn't matter that you're just a clerk. In any case, Lily has a powerful position at Williams Media. Even if you don't earn a lot, she can still support you," Iris said proudly. She knew that she'd beaten Dorothy this time. Dorothy wanted to go over and tell Kevin off, but she couldn't do that in front of all of her friends. Lily looked uncomfortable and began to regret bringing Kevin along. Then Iris stood up and waved at a young man on the other side of the room. "I'd like to announce a joyous occasion. On the 26th of this month, my daughter Rose will be getting married," Iris said proudly. "Vito Booker, please stand up and introduce yourself to my friends." Iris took her seat and a man quickly stood up. He politely waved at everyone.
"Hi, my name is Vito. I'm currently the general manager at the KWTD Corporation Chicago branch."
When he said this, everyone was clearly impressed. One of Dorothy's friends gushed. "The KWTD Corporation? That's one of the top 3 companies in the country." Another one added, "Iris, I'm so excited for you. He's already a manager at KWTD, and at such a young age. Rose will be set for life." The more Iris smiled, the more Dorothy frowned. Even though Lily had a promising career, Iris's son-in-law was way better than Dorothy's. It looked like Iris had won today's private little competition. Suddenly, one of them asked, "Vito,
How's it being a general manager at the KWTD Corporation?
The work can be exhausting, but as I move up the corporate ladder, I have greater and greater responsibility. I don't have much free time right now, but that's because I manage a few hundred people, Vito said very modestly. He smiled at Iris and said, Mom, for the wedding between Rose and me, I've arranged for a limo that's worth $500,000. What do you think? They seemed to find this almost as impressive as his position at KWTD. That's fine with me, Vito. I'll leave all the decisions up to you and Rose, Iris replied. She was trying to act humble, but you could see the pride in her eyes. I know what you mean, Iris, Lily commented. No matter how good a car is, it's just a means of transportation, from point A to point B. Then she turned around and asked Kevin, Don't you think so? Before coming to the reunion, Iris had asked Vito to help her embarrass Dorothy's son-in-law, so Vito naturally couldn't let an opportunity like this pass him by. Everyone's aesthetic sense is different. If you think that a car is just a means of transportation, then it's just a tool, Kevin said with a smile. Then what kind of car do you drive? Vito asked Kevin.
He was sure he'd win this round. They all turned to Kevin. Everyone seemed to think that Vito was in another league and Kevin couldn't possibly compare with him. And Dorothy was ready for her friend Iris to beat her again. My ride? Kevin slightly raised his eyebrows and said, It's just a Pagani Roadster, nothing special, basic blue color.
Vito looked at Kevin in disbelief. A Pagani? That's worth at least $3 million.
Everyone in the room gasped when they heard this. Lily coughed on the pastry she was eating and reached for a sip of coffee. Iris recovered from her shock and said,
Dorothy, I really didn't know that Lily treated her husband so well. What a lovely gift she bought for him.
She didn't say it out loud, but Iris thought that Kevin was just a gigolo who was mooching off her friend's daughter. Lily probably got her husband the car just to make Dorothy look good. However, when Kevin heard that, he said, Actually, the car is my boss's. It wasn't Lily who bought it for me. When he said this, everyone laughed. Dorothy couldn't take it any longer. She wanted to chase Kevin out into the street. But Kevin interrupted the laughter to clarify what he just said. So, I didn't buy the car, but my boss gave it to me because I'm doing so well in the company. That seemed to shut everyone up. They all looked at Kevin in amazement. They couldn't imagine what kind of boss would give a $3 million sports car to an ordinary employee.
Kevin, may I ask where you work? What's your boss's name?
Vito asked in disbelief. Kevin looked at Vito with a smile and said, My boss's last name is Dawn. Vito dropped the subject. This conversation definitely wasn't helping his mother-in-law. Besides, he didn't believe that Kevin really had such a generous boss. He was obviously just bragging to look good. So Vito changed the subject and turned to Iris.
Mom, this is a gift I got for you a while ago. Because of all that was going on at work, I never had a chance to give it to you.
He reached under the table and took out a gift box. Then he said to her,
This is a small token of my appreciation, and I'd like to tell you that you can rest assured that after Rose and I get married, I'll always treat her well.
This was just too much for Dorothy to bear. What would happen next? Vito, we're family now. There's no need for you to give me anything. While Iris was saying this, she reached out and took the gift. Her friends practically begged her to open the present. As they all watched enviously, Iris happily opened the package. When she pulled out the gift, everyone immediately gasped in surprise. Inside the box was a lustrous green emerald bracelet. They couldn't believe their eyes. One of her friends exclaimed, Iris, your son-in-law is so generous. Iris was also very surprised and asked Vito, This bracelet is beautiful. I hope it didn't cost you too much.
Not much, Mom, just about $30,000, Vito smiled and said, But the price isn't important. What matters is whether you like it.
Lily looked at the expensive emerald bracelet and was a little envious herself. Iris was ecstatic but pretended to protest. No, Vito, this is way too expensive. I can't accept this gift. You should give it to Rose. Her friend's jealous looks filled her with pride.
Mom, it's only $30,000. How is that expensive? Why don't you let your friends decide if it looks good on you?
Vito smiled casually and added,
If Rose likes it, I'll buy one for her too.
Okay, since you insist, I'll keep it, Iris said as she excitedly put the bracelet on her wrist. Vito, you're more than a son-in-law to me, Iris said very seriously. You're a wonderful young man and a welcome addition to our family. After Iris said this, she gave Dorothy a haughty look. Lily understood exactly what Iris meant by this. Vito was the general manager of KWTD Corporation Chicago branch, and Kevin was only a clerk in a small company. There was no comparison between the two. Kevin suddenly put down his coffee and got up to leave the room. Dorothy let out a little snort. She'd already decided that, after this embarrassing afternoon, she would definitely let Lily and Kevin divorce.
Dorothy, why did your son-in-law just leave?
Iris asked in a tone that was full of ridicule.
Maybe he has to get back to work, Dorothy replied coldly.
He's just a clerk. What could he possibly be so busy with? Could it be that his tiny little company doesn't allow him to take a day off? Iris said in disdain. A few of the other women heard this and couldn't help but laugh. Now that there wasn't anyone there to ridicule, their little gathering started to get a little boring. Just as some of them were thinking of leaving, Kevin came back with a red gift bag in his hand.
Why did you come back? Haven't you had enough? Dorothy asked him in disgust.
Lily sighed and walked over to Kevin. She whispered in his ear, "Just wait for me downstairs. There's no need to stay here and put up with this." But Kevin didn't say anything. He just gave her an enigmatic smile. Before they entered the cafe earlier, he'd already expected something like this would happen. So he texted Adriana and asked her to buy something special for him to present to his mother-in-law. Adriana had spent a lot of time in the upper class and knew how competitive some people could be. Kevin trusted her sense of taste, so he figured the gift couldn't be too bad. Kevin slowly placed the bag in front of Dorothy and said in his sweetest voice, "Mom, Lily and I have been married for a long time now, and I've never given you anything decent. This gathering seems like a nice place to present you with something to show you how much you mean to me." Most of them figured that Kevin, who was just a lowly clerk at a small company, had bought her something from the supermarket across the street. It couldn't be nearly as nice as the expensive bracelet that Vito had just given to Iris. Dorothy could hear her friends whispering to each other and hesitated to open the gift bag while they watched. She couldn't handle any more embarrassment today. When she pulled the gift box out of the red bag, it was obvious that it came from an expensive store, not one of those kiosks at the mall. Even before Dorothy opened the box, they all knew that whatever it wasn't a knockoff. Vito saw this as another opportunity to try and embarrass Kevin. The strategy hadn't gone too well when he asked about Kevin's car, but it was certain that this gift wouldn't be as expensive as the one he'd just given to Iris.
"How did you find that so quickly, Kevin? Did you just grab it from one of the shops down the street?"
Before Kevin could say anything, Iris stood up and said, "Quick, Dorothy, open it up. We're dying to see what your son-in-law just bought for you." The rest of her friends joined in, egging her on. Dorothy took a deep breath and looked anxiously at the box. Finally, she made up her mind. This would probably be another disappointment in her competition with Iris, but with all the peer pressure, she had no choice. As soon as she got home, she was definitely going to make Lily divorce Kevin. The room grew silent as she opened the velvet box to reveal a sparkling diamond necklace.
"Kevin, is this really from you?"
Dorothy asked in disbelief. "Do you like it, Mom?" Kevin asked with a smile. But Dorothy's friend still didn't believe that it was a genuine diamond necklace. How could someone like Kevin afford to buy something so expensive? On the other hand, it sure looked like the diamonds were real. Vito felt his mouth go dry as he looked on. Even from where he was sitting, he could tell that the diamonds were genuine, not cubic zirconia like you could get at a department store.
"Who is this guy? He's not what I expected from all the rumors I've been hearing," Vito thought to himself.
Lily got over her initial shock and tugged on Kevin's sleeve. "Tell me honestly, where did you get this necklace?" "A friend of mine gave it to me," Kevin said very honestly. When Dorothy heard this, she immediately wanted to throw the necklace in the trash. How could Kevin make her look like a fool? Just then, one of Dorothy's classmates walked over to her and asked, "May I take a look at your necklace? I just studied jewelry appraisal in college, and I'd be happy to give you my opinion." "Oh, all right," Dorothy said hesitantly before handing the necklace over to her. A few minutes later, the woman raised her head and then gave Kevin a puzzled look. She said, "In my opinion, these diamonds are all real. Judging from the color and size of them, they're all top quality. Also, the cut and polish are exquisite. Obviously the work of an expert." She looked at the necklace again and added, "I believe that this necklace has a value of at least $200,000. Iris and Vito felt very awkward when they heard this. The $30,000 emerald bracelet that he'd given his new mother-in-law paled in comparison. "Kevin, are you really giving this necklace to me?" Dorothy was so shocked that she couldn't even speak clearly. Kevin didn't answer Dorothy's question. Instead, he asked her, "Mom, do you really like it?" "Of course I like it," Dorothy answered without thinking. "I'm happy that you like it," Kevin said with a pleasant smile. Dorothy was so excited that she got a little short of breath. As everyone watched, she carefully put the necklace on. Her friends were envious and started commenting on how lucky she and Lily were to have Kevin in their family. One of them even invited them to visit them at their home. Dorothy was happy to have everyone sucking up to her for a change. Better yet, Iris and Vito were no longer the center of attention. Lily and Kevin left soon after and drove back to Corwin Tower. While they were heading down Lakeshore Drive, Lily looked sideways at Kevin and asked him, "I'm very curious to know what kind of friend would give you a necklace that's worth over $200,000. "Oh, it's just a friend who borrowed some money from me a while back," Kevin answered carefully. Lily thought about this and said, "Since he gave us such a valuable gift, we should at least invite him to dinner." Kevin wasn't sure if it was a good idea for Lily to meet his best friends yet, so he explained. "He was just passing through town and working abroad for a couple years. I think he's already headed back." Lily could tell that Kevin was hiding something, but she didn't want to start an argument. She just shook her head silently. When they returned home, Lily went to her room to rest. Kevin went to the study and pulled out the box that Dominic gave him and looked at the special blend of supplements. $500,000 for a single herbal pill. This guy's definitely wealthy, Kevin thought to himself. Then he opened one of the books that Officer Emmett had let him borrow and flipped through it. He found the instructions for putting the ingredients Dominic had given him into an energy drink. After carefully mixing everything and drinking the entire glass, Kevin sat down on the living room couch. He didn't feel any different at first, but about a half an hour later, he let out a long breath and felt a surge of energy. Even though it had been a long day, he changed his clothes and went to his home gym for a bodyweight workout. It was refreshing to do this in the comfort of his apartment, looking out on the park from the top of Corwin Tower. The next morning, Lily got a call from her family. They were having another meeting. She went down to the lobby and took a taxi to the Jones mansion. A little while later, Kevin woke up from a very deep and refreshing night of sleep and went to his office at Williams Media. Kevin sat back in his comfortable office chair and murmured to himself, "That blend Dominic gave me really was potent. I feel better already." Meanwhile, the Jones family was meeting to discuss how to move forward after all the upheaval in the past few days. Grandma Jones looked around the room at all the eager faces and said, "Now that the KWTD Corporation has invested $300 million to help us get through this crisis, we only have 40% of our company's shares left. Do any of you have some ideas about what we should do next?" They were unsure how to deal with this. While KWTD had saved them from bankruptcy, they didn't stand to see much profit at the end of the year. While they were wrestling with this dilemma, Jason stood up and shared what was on his mind.
"Grandma, I've got an idea. If it succeeds, the Jones family will be back on top in no time," Jason said confidently.
"What do you propose?" Grandma Jones asked.
Jason explained, "Grandma, now that we've turned over 60% of our shares to KWTD, we may never be able to recover them. So Tyler Dawn now has controlling interest in our company. My suggestion is to forget about the 60% that we've lost. Let's sell off 10% of the shares we have left. We can use that as seed money to start a new company. That's how we'll make our comeback.
That sounds like a good idea, but who would be willing to buy any of our shares? Grandma Jones asked worriedly.
Grandma, don't forget that everyone knows that we're affiliated with KWTD Corporation now, Jason said with a smile. When someone buys our shares, it's like they're forming a business relationship with KWTD. We can use that to our advantage.
One of his uncles had his doubts.
But who would be able to buy our shares? Even 10% is a lot of money.
They all looked back at Jason, wondering if he already had a plan.
Don't worry, everyone. I've been thinking about this for a while now, Jason said proudly. I have a friend who definitely has enough money to buy 10% of our shares.
And who might this friend of yours be? Grandma Jones asked.
Grandma, have you ever heard of Lucas Merriweather? Jason asked with a smile.
Suddenly, the entire room filled with chatter. They had all heard of the 5-time world champion of mixed martial arts. Everyone was surprised that Jason knew him personally. After all, he had dozens of martial arts schools, not just in Chicago, but across the country. Lily sat calmly while the relatives around her were getting excited about this golden opportunity. But she felt that she should advise her grandmother not to sell the shares. However, Lily was too shy to speak up. After all, the whole mess had been caused by her father and his foolish investment advice. All right, Jason, call Mr. Merriweather right away, Grandma Jones exclaimed with a joyful expression on her face. Jason nodded, took out his phone, and called his friend. Because he was a show-off, Jason put his phone on speaker mode.
Hello, is this Mr. Merriweather? Jason said proudly. This is Jason. Are you free right now? I have something I'd like to discuss with you.
Lucas Merriweather's voice blared from the speaker.
Jason, how are you? I always have time for you. What's going on?
Mr. Merriweather, the Jones family is planning to sell some shares. We'd rather sell them to you than to some strangers, so I'm wondering if you're interested.
Jason felt very important as he saw the amazed look on his relatives' faces.
How can I turn down an offer like that?
Merriweather said candidly.
Why don't we find a place to meet face to face? As it happens, I'm in Chicago right now.
That's great, Lucas. Have your driver take you to the Jones mansion. I'll be waiting for you here.
Jason ended the call and turned around to speak to his grandmother.
Grandma, it's settled. Mr. Merriweather will be here in a little while.
You've shown yourself to be very useful, Jason, Grandma Jones said with a smile. If you succeed in making this deal with Mr. Merriweather, I'll make sure you're next in line to lead the family business.
Thank you, Grandma,
Jason replied sincerely. Inside, he was jumping for joy. Then he gave Lily a proud look that told her it was thanks to her father Oliver that he had this chance to get back in Grandma's good graces. About a half an hour later, 2 long limos pulled up at the mansion's entrance. A moment later, the family butler announced, Mrs. Jones, Lucas Merriweather has arrived. As the tall, powerful man walked into the reception room followed by his assistants, Jason quickly brought Grandma Jones to welcome them.
Thank you for coming so quickly, Jason said sincerely. How could I make a good friend wait? Merriweather said graciously. I appreciate your confidence in me. Please let me introduce you to my grandmother, the Jones Company CEO, Jason said as he shook Merriweather's hand warmly.
Mrs. Jones, Merriweather said as he offered his hand to greet her. Welcome to the Jones Mansion, Mr. Merriweather. Grandma had a strange feeling as she shook his hand, but she didn't pay attention to it. Then she gestured to the comfortable leather armchair next to hers and said, Please have a seat. After Merriweather sat down, the Jones family members who were in the room sat quietly as they waited to see the outcome of this meeting. Next, Jason gave Merriweather a detailed explanation of his plan and how he hoped to get his support for it.
Unbelievable, Merriweather said angrily. The KWTD Corporation really made this outrageous offer? That's right, Lucas, and that's why my family wants to sell you our shares, Jason agreed.
Merriweather thought for a while before he made his offer.
I'm willing to pay $150 million for 10% of the Jones Company shares." This announcement shocked all of them, including Grandma Jones. She couldn't hide her joy. Grandma had been expecting Meriwether to offer half that amount at most. Jason was also stunned. "Mr. Meriwether, are you serious? We can't thank you enough for this generous offer." "No need to thank me," Meriwether replied with a strange expression on his face. "Money's not a problem for me, but I do have one condition." "What condition is that, Mr. Meriwether?" Grandma Jones asked him without thinking. "It's very simple," he replied calmly. Then he looked around the room like he was searching for something or someone. "Jason has told me about a cousin of his who is young and very beautiful. I've admired her for a long time. So, Mrs. Jones, I'm not here to just talk about shares. I hope you will give me your blessing to marry your granddaughter," Meriwether said with a smile. This was unexpected, to say the least. The Joneses weren't sure what to think. It was unusual to make this kind of request in the middle of a business deal. What made things even more awkward was that everyone knew that the most beautiful person in the entire family was Lily, but she was already married. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," Jason said with some hesitation. "Jason, how could you forget? I've admired your cousin Lily for a long time," Meriwether smiled casually. Before Jason could answer, Lily stood up and said emphatically, "Mr. Meriwether, I hate to disappoint you, but I'm already married." "Yes, Mr. Meriwether, Lily has been married for almost 3 years. Perhaps you'll consider one of my other granddaughters," Grandma Jones said awkwardly. Meriwether smiled and replied, "To tell you the truth, I only came here for Lily. Otherwise, I wouldn't be negotiating with you today." Then he added, "She can always get a divorce, can't she?" Grandma Jones's mood had changed from joy to disappointment. "Mr. Meriwether, you can't be serious." "Do I look like I'm joking?" he replied sternly. Jason was at a loss for words. He hadn't expected his friend to do something like this. Then Meriwether sneered and said, "Miss Jones, you really ought to consider my offer. I've already had my advisors investigate the situation. Lily's husband is in no position to help your family get through this crisis." He paused for a moment and added, "You have no choice but to sell me your shares. Do you think there's anyone else in all of Chicago who'd be willing to pay $150 million for your useless shares?" "But Lily is already married. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to offer her to you as part of a business deal," Grandma Jones explained haltingly. "If $150 million isn't enough, I'll make it $225 million. Meriwether countered as he smiled and looked at Lily. "According to my sources, her husband hasn't touched her in 3 years." Grandma Jones couldn't bear to hear this. Her family listened in complete silence. But part of her was actually weighing the offer. After all, Meriwether was willing to give them over $200 million, while Kevin had contributed nothing to the family in 3 years. And Lily's life would certainly be much easier if she were married to Meriwether. Then he walked slowly over to Lily and said, "We don't know each other, but I could learn to love you." When he finished speaking, Meriwether grabbed Lily by the wrist. "Mr. Meriwether, please let go." Lily struggled hard, but she wasn't strong enough to break his grip. "Your whole family is okay with this. Just ask them," he said as his mouth broke into an evil smile. The whole family was shocked by the way this promising business deal had turned ugly so quickly. "Let go of my daughter right now," Dorothy roared angrily. Even though she didn't like Kevin, he was still her daughter's husband. Everyone else joined in and demanded that Meriwether let Lily go. After all, he was in their home, not one of his martial arts schools. This was outrageous behavior. Lily didn't know where she got the strength, but she managed to push the man away. Meriwether turned around and looked at Grandma Jones, who was so angry she was trembling. Then he spoke to Jason. "I thought you asked me here in good faith. I'm very disappointed in you." "Mr. Meriwether, please don't be angry," Jason pleaded. Then he turned around and said loudly to Grandma Jones, "I think you should marry Lily DeLucas. We can always offer Kevin some money to settle with him. But Grandma Jones didn't respond, so Jason tried again. Grandma, we can't let the entire family be ruined just to save Lily's reputation. Grandma Jones was at a loss for words. None of them knew what to say to the man. Seeing Merriweather and his bodyguards, Lily lost all hope and gave up. Tears silently flowed down her cheeks. In the middle of all of this, the first person Lily thought of was actually Kevin. Kevin, please come quickly and save me from this beast, Lily prayed. Just as Merriweather was leaning down to kiss her, a powerful hand grabbed his neck from behind. This made him furious. He let go of Lily, and as he turned around, he cursed. Who the hell did that? Get away from my wife, Kevin growled at him. Kevin, please save me, Lily said tearfully when she saw Kevin. So, you're Lily's piece of crap husband? Merriweather said with disdain. This is none of your damn business. Lily's mine now. The anger flashed in Kevin's eyes as he grabbed Merriweather's arm and pulled him away from Lily. Then he threw the big man 10 feet away. The room shook as Merriweather's body hit the wall. The onlookers were shocked to see Kevin's show of strength, but they knew that Merriweather was a highly trained fighter. Kevin was definitely in trouble now. Do you have some kind of death wish? Merriweather bellowed as he stared at Kevin coldly. Well, as long as you're here today, you'll save me the trouble of hunting you down. Then he rushed toward Kevin like some kind of ferocious animal. Everyone was certain that Kevin was a goner now. Not even his friends could save him. Lily shouted, Kevin, run! You can't beat him! They all watched helplessly as the powerful man attacked Kevin. Kevin and Merriweather were fighting right in the main reception room of the Jones mansion. Although Kevin had taught Jason a lesson at Grandma Jones's birthday party, Lily doubted that her husband could beat Merriweather. But it made her feel good to see Kevin stand up for her. Hurry, Kevin, get out! Lily shouted as she ran to grab her phone and call the police. Kevin acted as if he didn't hear Lily's warning and just stood there, calmly facing Merriweather. Once her phone connected, Lily said, This is an emergency. Come to the Jones family mansion right away. There's a terrible fight. Lily's voice trailed off. Over the phone, the police operator could hear the fight going on in the background. The Joneses were all amazed to see Kevin standing there, tightly clenching Merriweather's fist. With your punching speed, you should consider going into the martial arts, Kevin said sarcastically. How dare you mock me? Merriweather snarled. While Kevin was holding his fist, Merriweather turned and gave him a powerful kick to the head. The 911 operator told Lily,
That sounds dangerous. Please keep at a safe distance. Who's fighting?
The MMA champion Lucas Merriweather is attacking my husband, Lily cried. Everyone closed their eyes. They were sure that Kevin would be severely injured by the kick. A cold smile emerged on Merriweather's face. He had used this move to knock out a lot of his opponents. But in the next second, to everyone's surprise, Kevin calmly reached out his left hand and grabbed Merriweather by the ankle. When he squeezed his hands together, Merriweather screamed in agony. Then Kevin grabbed Merriweather's hands and feet and threw him onto the ground with a dull thud. Everyone there, including Merriweather's bodyguards, were stunned. They couldn't believe he had beaten the world champion so easily. Before Merriweather could get up from the floor, Kevin put his foot on the man's chest, pinning him down. So what were you saying about my wife, you arrogant bastard? Kevin said as he leaned down and slapped Merriweather on the face. Stop hitting me! I was wrong, Merriweather begged him. So you admit that you were wrong. Then maybe you should apologize, Kevin said coldly. All right, I apologize, Merriweather said in a muffled voice. Not to me, to Lily. After Kevin finished speaking, he glared at Merriweather's bodyguards. None of them dared to move. They knew that they couldn't beat their boss even if they joined forces. Seeing how easily Kevin had defeated Merriweather, how could they possibly stand a chance? Never, Merriweather said bitterly. Never? Kevin grabbed the man by the collar and raised his palm to slap him. This is unbelievable, they all thought. Was this really happening? Lily gulped in disbelief. She'd been married to Kevin for 3 years and had never seen the side of him. Kevin gave Merriweather another punch to the jaw. It looked like he may have knocked out a couple of his teeth. "We're still waiting," Kevin said threateningly. I'll do it. Just stop hitting me," Merriweather begged. Kevin turned the big man to face Lily. As everyone looked on in shock, Merriweather said, "Lily, Mrs. Williams, I'm sorry. I should never have done this. Please forgive me." Before Lily could say anything, Kevin said, "I'll call the police now and let them handle this." "I've already called the police," Lily said softly. Kevin nodded and lowered Merriweather to the floor. Then he turned around and looked at the man's bodyguards. He ordered them, "Come over and sit on the floor with your hands on your heads." They frowned and looked at each other. "What are you waiting for? Come over here and sit down next to me," Merriweather shouted at them. "Yes, sir," they replied and sat on the floor to wait for the police. A few minutes later, they all heard sirens approaching the mansion. Officer Emmett walked in, followed by several backup officers. "What's this all about?" she asked. Then she looked at Merriweather and his bodyguard sitting quietly on the floor with their hands on their heads. "What's going on? Why are these guys sitting on the floor?" Officer Emmett frowned and asked. "Officer, please help me." Before Merriweather could finish what he was saying, Kevin grabbed him by his throat. "Kevin, what are you doing? You can't do that in front of a police officer," Officer Emmett said. "Well, Officer Emmett, I've already guessed what Merriweather was about to say. He just wants to complain. I figured I'd save you some time and just make him shut up," Kevin said calmly. Officer Emmett rolled her eyes at Kevin. Then she turned to the other officers and asked them to have 2 more cars sent over. She looked at the Jones family standing in a big circle, then pointed at the men sitting on the floor and added, "Take these guys back to the station for questioning." After Officer Emmett finished giving these instructions, she turned to Kevin and Lily and said, "Please follow me." "Of course, Officer Emmett," Kevin said as he shrugged his shoulders. Then he hesitated for a moment before saying, "Does my wife have to go?" She was a little frightened by all of this, and she should go get some rest. "It's fine. I can go with you," Lily said worriedly. Officer Emmett said, "I'll be in touch, ma'am." Then she nodded at Kevin and said, "Let's go." Kevin turned to Lily and said, "Go home and rest up. I'll be back soon." Then he and Officer Emmett left the Jones mansion. Kevin sat down in the front seat of Officer Emmett's cruiser. She put it into gear and drove through the gate toward the city. After about 10 minutes, Kevin asked her, "Aren't we going to the police station?" He knew that they weren't in the right neighborhood. "You know the police station pretty well, don't you?" Officer Emmett gave him an odd look and then smiled. "Don't look at me like that," he said. "I drive by the police station all the time, and this is definitely the wrong direction. What's going on?" "Forget it. I won't tease you anymore," she said in a slightly playful tone. "Actually, I already know what kind of guy Merriweather is. I can find out all I need to know from the Jones family." Suddenly, Kevin's eyes lit up. "That pill I made actually helped you, didn't it?" "How did you guess?" she said in surprise. "I'm not just another pretty face," Kevin joked. "Don't flatter yourself," Officer Emmett said as she went back to looking at the road. As they got closer to downtown, the traffic started to back up, even though it wasn't rush hour yet. Officer Emmett slowed down and squeezed into the next lane over. "Kevin," she said, "do you have another one of those pills?" "Officer Emmett, what kind of man do you think I am? I don't just go around handing out pills," Kevin replied as he smiled casually. "I really didn't expect it to have such a great effect on me. A few hours after you left, I started to feel fantastic," Officer Emmett said enthusiastically. "If you have one left over, may I have it?" she asked awkwardly. "The supplement has already done its work. Why would you want another one?" Kevin asked. He found her request puzzling. She didn't strike him as someone who was greedy. "I have a very good friend who needs some help," she explained. She knew that something this miraculous would be difficult to make herself. Somehow, Kevin seemed to have a gift for it. "I'm not sure I can help," he explained honestly. "I understand," Officer Emmett answered. He could see in her eyes that she was disappointed. "However, there may be a way for me to help your friend," Kevin said with a smile. "How?" Officer Emmett's face lit up. Kevin glanced at her first, then asked, "Do you know Dominic Archer? I sold him one a couple of days ago." "You mean you want me to pay for it?" Officer Emmett asked. Kevin slowly nodded his head. He hadn't heard a lot of the ingredients in the recipes that he'd found. If he wanted to keep experimenting with this herbal medicine, he'd need a lot of money. But he couldn't use any of the Williams Media or KWTD Corporation assets to pay for his personal research. He wanted those companies to continue to grow because he knew he'd need them in the future. So he had to fund the project himself. "As long as your friend is willing to pay, I can do it," Kevin said calmly. "Don't worry, money isn't a problem. My friend is pretty well off." Then Officer Emmett asked curiously, "How do you know Dominic Archer? And how much did he pay for your pill?" "How did I meet him? I'd rather not talk about it," Kevin casually said. "But he didn't pay much, just $500,000. Officer Emmett slammed on the brakes when she heard this. "How much did he pay?" Officer Emmett repeated. $500,000. "Didn't you say that your friend could afford it?" Kevin said with a smirk. Of course, Kevin knew very well that Officer Emmett's friend would never be able to afford to pay that much. After all, hardly anyone in the whole city was as rich as Dominic. As Kevin expected, Officer Emmett didn't say anything else. She just quietly followed the car in front of them and slowly crossed the next intersection. "Let's go to the police station for a statement," Officer Emmett said blankly. "Officer Emmett, I consider us to be friends. Why don't I give your friend a 20% discount?" Kevin said nervously. Was Kevin really afraid of going down to the police station? Of course not. He knew that Meriwether was completely in the wrong, although he may have gotten a little carried away defending Lily against the bully. Kevin was acting anxious so he could give Officer Emmett a way out. "A 20% discount? Isn't that still a few $100,000? Officer Emmett said sadly. "Kevin, are you teasing me? Are you having fun?" He knew that she couldn't possibly afford to help her friend no matter how generous she was. "Forget about it, Officer Emmett. I value our relationship. In the short time I've known you, we faced a lot together, even fought side by side. I'll just give you the pill," Kevin said gently. "Really?" Officer Emmett said as she pulled to the curb and slammed on the brakes again. Her sudden move caught Kevin off guard and he grabbed the armrest. "Officer Emmett, can you please be more careful? I can give you the pill, but I do have one condition," Kevin said nonchalantly. "I knew it. I already told you I can't afford it, so if you're asking for any money, we can forget about the whole thing," Officer Emmett said bluntly. "Don't worry. The condition I want is very simple. All you have to do is say please," Kevin said with a smile. Officer Emmett turned her head and continued driving. A few minutes later, she said, "Okay, please give me the pill for my friend." "Wasn't that easy?" Kevin said with a smile. Then he took a small bottle out of his pocket and poured the pill out into his hand. "Thank you," Officer Emmett said gratefully. Then she quickly took out her phone and called her friend. "Hello? Where are you right now? I've got the pill." She made a U-turn and started to head back out of the city. "Where are we going now?" Kevin wondered. As Officer Emmett was driving Kevin away from the Jones family mansion in her squad car, she decided to ask him for a favor. She needed one of the herbal pills that he'd made so she could help a friend. When Kevin finally agreed, she picked up her phone and called her friend to say she was on the way. "All right, wait for me there," Officer Emmett said as she hung up the phone. She turned her head and said to Kevin, "My friend is having breakfast at the Whistler Hotel. We're almost there, so let's head over to meet him." After hearing Officer Emmett say that her friend was having breakfast at the Whistler, Kevin had an idea of who it was. "Anybody who has such an expensive breakfast has to be a snob," Kevin commented. Officer Emmett was surprised to hear this. Realizing that something was wrong, she said, "Kevin, my friend is just a little spoiled by his family, so sometimes he splurges. Please promise me you won't bicker with him, okay?" "All right, I'll go with you, but let's get one thing clear first. If this friend of yours isn't polite, I may not just hand over the pill," Kevin said calmly. When they arrived at the Whistler Hotel, they took the elevator up to a private room on the 3rd floor. As he opened the door, Kevin noticed that there were 5 or 6 couples in the room. Based on the way they were dressed, Kevin was even more certain that they were just snobs who had nothing to do all day long. A well-dressed man walked up and stood next to Officer Emmett. It was Sherwin Blair. He took her by the hand and introduced her to everyone. "I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Kelly Emmett. I'm sorry," he paused for a moment, "Lieutenant Emmett, as you can see by her uniform." One of his table companions said, "Delighted to meet you. When are you getting married? We can't wait to attend your wedding." Soon, but let me tell you something else," he replied. "Today we have another surprise. Mrs. Blair just brought me a miraculous herbal pill," he said happily. "Sherwin, how many times have I told you we aren't married yet, so it's too soon for anyone to call me Mrs. Blair," Officer Emmett said with a hint of irritation in her voice. "My fiancée is just a little nervous. Please, don't be offended," Blair replied. Just then, one of them looked at Kevin and asked abruptly, "Isn't this the guy who married into the Jones family? What's he doing here?" There was an awkward pause, then Blair turned toward Kevin and sneered. "Are you lost? This is the Whistler Hotel, you know. They don't just let anyone come in here." "Then why can't I be here?" Kevin asked with a smirk. "Everyone knows that the Jones family is desperate to find people to buy shares in their company. They'll be bankrupt soon, and there's nothing they can do about it," Blair said in a snobby tone. Then he glanced at Kevin and added, "Can you even afford to eat here? You probably should have stayed at home." "Shut up, Sherwin," Officer Emmett said angrily. "Kevin was kind enough to bring you the herbal remedy I was telling you about." Everyone in the room was shocked when they heard that. They really didn't expect Blair's girlfriend to defend Kevin. What shocked them even more was that Kevin actually had an herbal supplement that could help Blair. It was a rare skill, and there were a lot of rich people who were desperate to have access to the latest breakthroughs. They really doubted that Kevin had the ability to help their friend. "Kelly, you can be so gullible. Kevin is obviously playing you for a fool," Blair said arrogantly. "Think about it. How could someone like him have any knowledge or skill to make an effective herbal remedy?" Before Officer Emmett could respond, Kevin spoke up. "Because Officer Emmett and I are friends, I was going to give you a good price, but now I've decided to increase it by 30%. "Kevin, what are you doing?" Officer Emmett asked him in shock. She knew how much Dominic had paid Kevin. An increase of 30% would be a fortune. Kevin shook his head and answered her, "I haven't done anything to these people, and they're treating me so rudely. What did you expect?" "So what? I'm not going to waste any more time talking to someone like you," Blair said contemptuously. "Listen carefully," he said with a sneer. "The only reason Kelly has made any progress is her training and her healthy diet. It has nothing to do with that stupid pill of yours. I'm warning you right now," he continued angrily. "If you do something like this again, you won't like what happens." "Sherwin, why are you saying this? Kevin is my friend, and I'm the one who brought him here today," Officer Emmett asked him. She was getting very upset. "Kelly, Kevin is obviously a liar. Don't be fooled. Your sudden improvement has nothing to do with him," he answered firmly. Kevin took a deep breath. He couldn't believe Officer Emmett had such a jerk for a boyfriend. "Okay, since her progress had nothing to do with me, then I guess I'll leave." Kevin turned around and started to head for the door. "Stop! Who said you could leave without asking for permission?" Blair snapped at him. "Enough! Sherwin, you're hurting my feelings," Officer Emmett said angrily. Just then, the door opened from the outside. 5 or 6 waiters came in carrying enormous trays. They were used to scenes like this and started serving the meal like nothing was wrong. Blair gave Officer Emmett a bewildered look. He didn't know why his girlfriend trusted Kevin so much, but he figured it wouldn't be worth it to have a fight with her over some useless loser. So Blair took a deep breath and said, "All right, Kelly, he can eat with us today, but I'm only doing this as a favor to you." Seeing Blair give in, Officer Emmett's expression softened up a little. Then she turned to Kevin and said apologetically, "I know this didn't get off to a great start, but can you please stay for the meal? As a favor to me? I'll definitely make sure Sherwin apologizes to you later." "All right, I'll stay." Kevin nodded slightly as he tossed the herbal pill to Officer Emmett. "Thank you," she said gratefully. Then Officer Emmett gestured for Kevin to take a seat. She turned to Blair and said, "Just trust me, okay? Take this." Blair didn't want to risk making her angry again, so he took the pill and swallowed it. Then he stood up with a glass of rosé in his hand and said, "Kevin, at Kelly's request, you're our guest today." Kevin thought this was pretty funny. He could eat at the Whistler Hotel any time that he wanted. Blair saw that this hadn't gotten much of a reaction from Kevin. He sneered and went on with his insulting toast. "The Jones family is on the verge of bankruptcy, so as a favor to Kelly, I can instruct our company to hire you on as a building custodian. Starting salary would be, let's say, $1,500 a month. How about it?" The whole room burst into laughter. One of the guests said, "You're too generous, Mr. Blair. Just make sure he can do a good job cleaning the restrooms." Officer Emmett was embarrassed. She suddenly felt guilty that she'd brought Kevin along. If she hadn't insisted, Kevin wouldn't be in this humiliating situation. "So, you're Sherwin Blair," Kevin said with a mocking smile. "Hardly anyone has heard of you. Do you really think you're a big shot?" The room got quiet all of a sudden. They all knew that Blair was hot-tempered and wouldn't put up with Kevin's insults. But Blair held his anger in so he wouldn't upset Officer Emmett. He shouted at Kevin, "So this is how you respond to my generous offer? You really are a lowlife." "Look who's calling me a lowlife. You should take a good look in the mirror," Kevin replied spitefully. Blair threw his wine glass on the floor. Shards of glass went everywhere. Just as he was about to make a move toward Kevin, the door was flung open and Drake hurried into the room, followed by a few of his bodyguards.
"What's going on here? Who's causing trouble?" Drake growled as he looked around the room.
Kevin was sitting with his back facing the door, so Drake didn't recognize him yet. One of the people whispered to the others, "This is Drake. He's the head of security here." They all knew the place he had in Chicago's underworld. Suddenly, Blair had an idea. He straightened out his tie and walked towards Drake with a smile on his face. "Hello, sir. I wonder if you still remember me," Blair said warmly. "My father and I brought some gifts to Mitchell Cook's birthday party." When his breakfast companions heard that he knew someone like Drake, they were very impressed.
"Who are you?" Drake replied brusquely. "Did you throw the glass? I don't like troublemakers."
Blair's face froze. He immediately pointed at Kevin and explained excitedly, "Sir, I'm Sherwin Blair. Perhaps you've heard of me. I'm not the one causing trouble today. He's the one who broke the wine glass. He was also very rude to my girlfriend. Please, show him the exit for me," Blair said pretentiously. However, Drake didn't seem to hear what he was saying. He was frowning and staring at Kevin's back. Kevin took a sip of his coffee and said, "Drake, are you really sure you want to do that?" "Be careful how you talk to this man," Blair scolded him. They were all very upset by Kevin's attitude and were afraid that Drake would take it out on them all. Just then, Drake reached out and took Blair forcibly by the elbow. "What's the meaning of this?" the man asked. He had no idea why Drake was doing this.
"Stay right here,"
Drake growled at him. After saying this, he slowly walked over and stood in front of Kevin. As everyone watched in amazement, Drake offered his hand and apologized.
"I'm so sorry, Mr. Williams. This is all my fault. I didn't recognize you right away, sir," Drake said nervously.
You could have heard a pin drop.